across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. As you will imagine, there's a lot to talk about this afternoon. The manhunt continues in the US after Donald Trump's ally and conservative activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated in broad daylight during a college debate in Utah. This is beyond horrendous and it's beyond comprehension. How has politics become so divided? Where would you put the pin in the board as to where that point happened? We'll have more on that in a few moments. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has sacked Lord Mandelson. My goodness, about time. As the UK ambassador, of course, to the USA, after new emails revealed the full nature of his friendship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Can't make it up. And Suella Braverman has challenged the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood to trigger Article 58 to exit the ECHR, declaring that the UK is at a moment of crisis, a crisis of security and trust. She is, of course, bang on. Defy anyone to disagree on that point. Lines are open, 0344 499 1000. Now, I'm asking this question, how has politics become so divided? Where was the tipping point? I guess that kind of defines it. Where was the tipping point? The moment where one group went from simply having a different opinion to another group to now seeing that other group as the enemy. Not any old enemy, but an enemy you'd happily see dead. How did we get there? How did we arrive at that point? Where is it a moment in time? Was it a specific event? Social media, I'm sure, plays a part in it. How did we become so divided? What happened here? There are some obvious clues. And I reflect and almost repeat the words of Alex Phillips from earlier. If you constantly go around the place casually calling your political opponents Nazis and racist based on nothing more than you simply disagree with them, you end up where Charlie Kirk ended up. And it kind of is as simple as that. Charlie Kirk was a loud and proud, passionate right-winger, of course. He espoused views that sometimes divided the room. He sometimes got things wrong, once in a while dipping his toe into the odd conspiracy. He admitted so much, but mostly he was a patriotic Christian man who stood for good old-fashioned family values, the unity of marriage, the responsibility of community, the adherence to law. He couldn't be asked with daft, invented arguments about gender and the like, and called out the supposed group who saw themselves at the top of the moral tree. He would call out that synthetic indignation from those who claimed their feelings were more important than reality or science. He was, despite a library of opinions, a fairly straightforward middle-class 31-year-old father of two from Illinois. He did not deserve to end his life with a bullet in the side of his head while talking to students on a sunny day in the Beehive State. That wasn't how that story was meant to go. So some don't know who Charlie Kirk is. That is fine. And Charlie Kirk and all that happened in the last 24 hours becomes, and I would like to think that Mr. Kirk would see this curiously as a kind of positive, because it does come at a time when we, I hope, can begin to debate how politics got so darn divided. But for those who aren't familiar with Charlie Kirk's work, let's have a listen to the man in his own words.
I go around universities and have challenging conversations, and because that's what is so important to our country, is to find our disagreements respectfully, because when people stop talking, that's when violence happens.
He's absolutely bang on. If you've never watched any of those videos, I urge you to. They're brilliant. They're brilliant. It often is the case of some sort of squealing non-binary lefty standing there shouting at him saying, "How dare you have this view?" And Charlie would have just said, "I don't care about your emotions. Your emotions are not relevant to me or anyone else." And that rather kind of, if you like, puts the pin in the bullseye on this one. Because it was really, ultimately, the point. We're not leading this on... discussion on politics and the division should never base anything on emotions. The world will go blind if you do that. That's why courtrooms don't make decisions based on emotions, as horrendous as some cases are. You know, you don't decide on someone's guilt because the victim's nan is upset. You don't do that kind of stuff. Emotions in this respect are really, really dangerous. Just talk facts, talk differences, and that's how it should be. And Kirk absolutely embodied all of that. It was his point. And the one thing, and I'd like to think both the left and the right, as well as the right, could agree on this, is that he did spend a lot of time, spent some time over here with various addresses as well, but particularly in universities, which is sadly where he lost his life. But that was his kind of terrain. That was his sort of area where he was most comfortable telling young people about this. Maybe young people who'd never really considered things in this respect before. They'd only really seen that crass polarity that is almost putting its stamp all over the political conversation these days. And his point was to say, no, actually, I mean, he had his views. You don't have to, it really doesn't matter if you disagree with his views. I happen to think that most people would disagree with at least 80% of what he had to say. And not every Republican agreed with Charlie Kirk. I mean, it just doesn't matter. That's the point of this. So given that it doesn't, given that your emotions don't count, they really don't count on this. They absolutely, synthetic indignation plays no part in any of these arguments, but that's where it is. I consider this, and I see it on the left and the right. Look, he said what he said on numerous occasions, and he lost his life for the kind of opinions he had. You know, this man was not the great dictator. It was not anywhere near that. He was not suggesting that you are fundamentally flawed because you have different opinions to him. He was just suggesting you are fundamentally wrong. And that's really how it works. I did spot, and I thought this was really quite sad. I looked up this morning, given that lots of people around the world have left messages on social media about this man. And Joe Biden had sent his prayers to Charlie Kirk's family and friends. And then, of course, you can only imagine what then happened. I mean, if you ever wanted a great example that kind of illuminates what I'm talking about, Joe Biden says, you know, really, you know, very sad news that violence has no place in our society. Thoughts are with the family. First response to Joe Biden's Twitter, or one of the first responses I saw to Joe Biden's Twitter, this is all your fault. I hope you die. Right, okay. Right there, you kind of have the problem because 1 minute you're saying, hang on, no, this was all about, I'm protecting the kind of thinking that Charlie Kirk would have espoused. And then you go ahead and do the very same thing that the people that you normally attack would do. So you end up with this, and I know social media is not the best place, not the best barometer of logic, common sense and all things good, but nonetheless, it was interesting just to sort of see that in action. And what I want to know is how politics became so divided. Peter Barnes is with us, political strategist and all-round nice bloke. Peter, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Well, let's just remind ourselves of what the President of the United States said on all of this. We know a massive police hunt is underway for the killer of Charlie Kirk following that horrendous singular bullet that struck his neck yesterday as he spoke at Utah Valley University. Donald Trump paid his respects last night. Have a listen.
To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. He fought for liberty, democracy, justice, and the American people. He's a martyr for truth and freedom, and there's never been anyone who was so respected by youth. This is a dark moment for America. Charlie Kirk traveled the nation, joyfully engaging with everyone interested in good faith debate. His mission was to bring young people into the political process, which he did better than anybody ever, to share his love of country and to spread the simple words of common sense. Today, because of this heinous act, Charlie's voice has become bigger and grander than ever before, and it's not even close. May God bless his memory. May God watch over his family. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
And of course, to compound this horror, Peter, his family, including his 2 children, were in the crowd.
Yes, they were. I knew Charlie, actually. I met him a number of times. He was one of the most remarkable people. Most remarkable person I've probably ever met. I mean, to debate with him was infuriating because he was so good at it.
Yes.
He really was. But it was it was one of those evenings where I was like, is this actually happening? Because I think the president just put it perfectly, that Charlie's mission was the United States of America. He put everything into that. And everything he did was for America. Now, whether you agreed with him or you disagreed with him, that's rather by the by, but he did it for America. And I think you touched on a really good point with Trump there, and it's the bringing the youth into politics. The Turning Point organization he helped run and set up, it's been astounding at mobilizing people on campuses, not just in America but actually over here as well. You know, there's Turning Point UK. It's a great organization, and it's a very dark day for the right in politics, and just politics in the world in general, actually, you're so right that we're now at this point where having an opinion can get you killed.
Where did this happen? What was the...
I was listening to the monologue.
Yeah, is there a tipping point?
I had the tipping point, the 2003 Iraq invasion, because it ruined credibility. Because then by that point, everything else was just the further hollowing out of institutions. Institutional decline and collapse, the trust that we had in the institutions that held the state together, that held us all together. Once that left, it all fell apart. And what Iraq did, because it was the dodgy dossier, and then it was the kind of, are we George W. Bush's lapdog? Are we all this? This narrative kind of built up that Britain lied to its people. Let's not forget, it was the largest protest we've ever seen on the streets of the capital, if not in the country, and it was ignored. People felt ignored. The government ploughed ahead with it anyway. That really did, for me, I think, cement this idea of they're just not listening and they just don't care. And then you had Cameron saying he was the heir to Blair, very famously, and he continued the New Labour tradition, and that kind of divide only got bigger and bigger and bigger. So people blame Brexit, but Brexit is the result of about 15 or 20 years worth of division. So it's not really the Brexit kind of divided the country. It didn't, but it was already divided. It was just the people who were not normally given a voice were given a voice, and that kind of shocked the establishment.
And then you kind of dovetail social media into that.
Yes.
So
my thing with social media,
the very point you just made is now then given a platform.
Yes. So my thing with social media is it's not the creator of the problem, it's the amplifier. So basically, the divisions already existed. It's just you weren't aware of them because you didn't have access to them. So this is the thing. Everybody keeps blaming social media for things. It's not. It is merely the thing that turned up the volume, and we have to kind of understand that if we're going to start really getting to grips with the influence of social media on things like young men and all this kind of stuff, on grooming and things. We really do completely misunderstand social media and its influence on our politics. Yeah.
And it's got to this point where, look, the left will say, that the right are it's this term, and I mentioned it at the beginning, Peter, if you're a left-winger, then defining your opposition, or your enemy as it's now seen, as a Nazi is fine. It's fine because you're attacking someone with the same moral fabric or credentials as Saddam Hussein or Idi Amin or something. It doesn't. So it's no problem to call Nigel Farage that, or anybody else that who you disagree with, because these people, as far as you're concerned, are morally and intellectually inferior to you.
Yes, exactly. See, it's quite interesting, really. What happened was, after the Second World War, the left, the intellectual left, suddenly realised that they had the same opinions as the Nazis. So they had to suddenly shift and kind of redefine what a fascist was, because a fascism is a left-wing ideology. It's not a right-winger in terms of its state control and its monopoly over everything. So what they had to do was kind of shift it into being a right-wing idea. And what kind of weirdly kind of came into it was, if you don't agree with this, you're not just wrong, you're a bad person. Yeah. And it was that moralising.
You're morally wrong.
You're morally wrong. And once you are morally wrong, I then get to kind of other you. I don't have to pay attention to you. You're not a person. Correct. And when you've done that, you can say whatever you want. So this now we've got the problem where we have a literal fascist, Putin, walking into Europe, and nobody seems to care because you've been calling everybody a fascist for the last 50 years. George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush are fascists, then everybody is. You know, and David, I always find it funny. Alistair Campbell says every time the Tory government won, it was like, this is the most right-wing government we've ever seen. I was like, well, I personally would love one, but we've never got one. We've never seen it. You know, but this is the point. Is it's these bits of hyperbole that are ratcheting everybody up. You amplify that on social media. You then add in echo chambers, and this is how it happens. Because Charlie's famous line is, violence happens when you stop talking.
Correct.
And you've got to keep talking. It's so important. Pluralistic societies are how we win.
Yeah, and you look at some of those Charlie Kirk videos where, and there's so many of them, you know, where a student confronts him and there is a sort of a very angry, you know, I said, deliberately being stereotypical, kind of, you know, a non-binary, bearded woman, whatever, you know, shouting, looking at Charlie Kirk quite literally as if they are looking at Chairman Mao.
Yes.
I mean, the anger they are seeing when they're confronting him. Who are you to say X, Y, Z? And he says, well, you know, I'm a citizen, I'm allowed a view.
Yes.
You know, but they're really satisfied that they are talking to somebody who is below human. And somebody who has the moral credentials of an S-house rat.
Exactly, yeah, and it's that idea that once you other, you can then ignore. But the problem is, once you've othered and othered and othered, you've then suddenly, get like the Labour Party, you've got into power, and everybody you've been calling a fascist and a racist and everything, they're not going to vote for you anymore.
No.
So then you suddenly end up with a big strategic problem of you don't have any voters because you've alienated everybody. And unfortunately, because we kind of live in a very silo existence now, we don't have a shared cultural experience. We don't watch television together anymore as a nation, not really. So we're not even living the same life as everybody else. So because we're so individualized, our news is so tailored to us, that because we're so apart, trying to bridge that gap is so difficult. But we've got to find a way to do it. We really do, because we can't have another guy shot just for having an opinion. Yeah. We can't have that.
100%. Peter Barnes is with us. More to come from Peter in a moment. We're also asking that question. How has politics become so divided? What is your view on that? Peter gave his assessment of where he thinks it started. Where is that point in the political map or our journey where it all began, if you like, this division where a political opponent doesn't just become an opponent with somebody with a different view, they become your enemy. Not just your enemy, a subhuman enemy. Something that you'd find on the bottom of your shoe if you went for a walk in a mucky park. That's who they are. And you've, as Peter said, you've othered them to such an extent. You can do anything after that, can't you? These people are scum. And that's where we're at. Where was the point it began? 0344 499 1000. More coming up next on Talk.
Do you fear for your own safety at all?
There are moments, and there have been a few instances, but But I think we just have to have the courage to push on. And I repeat, I think the legacy to Charlie Kirk is those of us who must push on and stand rock solid.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one comes in from Rachel. It says, Ian and Peter, the last time I was this upset over someone I didn't know personally, Princess Diana had died. Charlie wasn't far right. He was just right-wing. To be murdered for that could be the start of something very sinister. It is interesting, isn't it, that we all, again, many people didn't know anything about Charlie Kirk or who he was or what he represented, which in the sense of this debate, it doesn't matter if you didn't know who
it doesn't matter.
It really doesn't matter. But it's kind of what he represented, where this happened. I mean, there is a very... It's quite hard to watch, actually. I don't know when it was filmed, quite recently, of his little girl running into a TV. Have you seen
Yes,
this?
I have, yeah.
He's just finished an interview on Fox or wherever it was, and at the very end, his little girl looks to be about sort of 4.
Yeah, she's not very old,
running onto the set and giving him a big cuddle.
Yeah.
And somebody yesterday took away that little girl's dad. They decided, nope, you haven't got a right to have a dad anymore, and happiness that would normally go with it, Christmas around the corner. I'm going to remove that from you based on nothing more than I disagree with you.
Yeah, it was done by a coward and a person with a word I can't say on this channel.
I hope they can find this person.
I hope they do.
I know that's of course everybody hopes you can find him.
But I hope we hold him up, or whoever it is, because we have to now deal with this in a way that we've not been able to do for quite some time. There is a very profound moment here, and unfortunately, I said it some time ago, it will take a moment like this for us to grow up. Our politics has to grow up, stop the name calling, stop the playground antics. It's got to change. Otherwise, there's just got to be more bodies.
This man could fry for this if he is caught. They have the death penalty in Utah. Well, I don't think it's the electric chair anymore, but whatever it is.
I'd make him sit and watch that video of the little girl running on the stage for the rest of his life.
It's really tricky to watch in the context of this, and I think, just to go back to Rachel's message, it is, some certain stories for different reasons just kind of get you, and I think with this, the audacious nature of what happened, the fact that it was in public, the fact that his wife and kids were sitting in the audience, the fact that there was, every student that was there in that field, there were hundreds and hundreds of them, just watched a man murdered in broad daylight. I mean, the knock-on effect of all of this is just horrific.
Staggering.
We are going to come back to more comment on this and throwing out, and I hope understandably, I hope it's a reasonable question on a day like this to ask, how has politics become so divided? And it's kind of an example of that, I suppose, in a weird way. Lord Mandelson has been finally sacked, fired as the US ambassador after that scandalous friendship with Jeffrey Epstein came to light. Let's listen to the announcement that came from the Minister of State for Europe, North America and UK Overseas Territory. Stephen Dougherty said this morning.
In light of the additional information in emails written by Lord Mandelson, the Prime Minister asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw him as ambassador. That is very clear. The decision was taken by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, and those emails show that the depth and the extent of the relationship is materially different from that known at the time of his appointment.
And just to declare, I thought Lord Mandelson was an oddball and a snivelling little tick. I didn't want him dead, however, and still don't want him dead in any shape or form. I don't even want him harmed. But he's lost his gig, and rightly so, frankly, Peter, because, of course, what came out here wasn't, you can't help if you knew somebody before they knew he was a wrong. That's fine. Unfortunately, Lord Mandelson knew Epstein before and during the time when
Yes.
people knew he was a wrong and stuck with him and sent him nice little notes.
Yeah, my
saying,
best
keep
pal.
fighting, my best pal.
My best pal.
We
That-
love you, Jeffrey.
Yeah,
the
those
man's
two
in jail
words.
at this point,
Yeah.
waiting to find out what's going to happen
Yeah.
with an accusation for sexual crimes against a minor. And Lord Mandelson, the man whose previous skills were being able to spot a bear trap at a million paces,
Yeah.
which makes it even more mysterious, was up close and personal and thought he was, one of the good
This
guys.
was a real blind spot for what was he? We used to call him the master of the dark arts of politics.
dark arts,
Yeah,
the
he was the
Svengali
architect
of-
of.
yeah.
He was the architect of New Labour. He is a great political operator, probably one of the finest we'll ever see. However, you cannot be the face of Britain. You cannot be Britain's man in the room when you have a ties to that man. You just can't.
What would really hurt him, though, is the fact that this. I kind of find these stories fascinating on so many levels. This would have meant so much to Peter Mann, this job.
Yes.
This was, he's the great sort of boomerang politician. He's come back a couple of times from being
He's like the
fired.
cockroach of politics.
Indeed, yeah, he just returns. You couldn't annihilate this man politically speaking,
Yeah.
because he just sort of returns. And here he was, sort of into his 60s, I'd imagine. What a great retirement gig!
Yeah.
You become the ambassador of the to the United States. Only yesterday, he was in the White House with Trump for an hour. He spent with Trump.
They actually had quite a weird kind of friendship that none of us thought expected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he had an ability to do that. He was a great network. He was an operator. He knew people. That was his great
He knew
skill.
people. You're given a nice car.
Yeah.
You probably have some security. You live in a palace, for goodness sake. The absolute beauty. What a way to go
His
into your sunset
excellency
years.
and his lordship.
He's all of that.
I mean, yeah, he'd have loved that. He
And
was a
now,
titles guy.
he's probably on an aeroplane right now coming back to the UK.
Yeah, I hope it's in like economy as well.
Yeah, do EasyJet go all the way
Yeah, I was
from
just
Washington?
thinking that. Yeah,
But it's right that he's gone.
yes, there is one bit though in all of this that I find very interesting that I think needs real investigation, and that was a moment when he was the business secretary. One of the times he was in the cabinet before he resigned under scandal.
Yeah.
I would remind people that he facilitated a deal with Epstein's company whilst Epstein was still in. Was in jail or was awaiting trial or something, and the deal was with the UK government and a subsidiary of it.
Interesting.
That is a very interesting moment because is that abuse of office? Is that influence beyond the steps of a cabinet secretary?
Yeah.
That's the one that sticks to me. Don't get me wrong. The links to Epstein in general are abhorrent, but when we look at this from a political point, for what can we learn from it? One, why was none of this found out in the kind of discovery? Because they're supposed to have some of the best kind of intelligence going to have this kind of level of clearance. That seems to rather by the by. And again, he had this reputation. Why was he even considered? He had to resign twice in scandal. He had a reputation of being a bit of a wrong-un, and they elevated him to the ambassadorship.
To that kind of role. And he was playing it right because every time he gave a speech he was blowing smoke up Trump's trouser leg.
Again,
even a couple of days
knew what
ago
he was doing.
this.
I don't take the skill away from him, but he shouldn't have been in the job in the first place, as far as I'm concerned. Because this was a moment. This was waiting to happen. If it wasn't Epstein, it was something else.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Just very briefly, Peter, because we've kind of overshot time on this. Suella Braverman issues a challenge to the Home Secretary to trigger Article 58. That would mean we leave the ECHR. Of course, this has been a crossroads, a sticking point, a barrier, whatever you want to call it, to all manner of issues, particularly around immigration.
Yes, she's commissioned a report about actually how we disentangle. It's actually quite an interesting bit. I've only read this executive summary, but I do plan to read the whole thing because this idea you could just yank Britain out of it is rather preposterous because we're so ingrained into the ECHR. Every bit of our legal system has got its fingers in it. It's all over the place. It's somewhat infected. I like to use that word, but the report is about how we pull out in terms of making sure we still have the enforcement of rights and also how we cooperate with other nations, because in a lot of the international treaties have the ECHR as a binding part of it. Now, the Good Friday Agreement is a prime example, but in the report apparently it says that it's only referenced. It's not actually integral to it, because everyone said you can't pull out of the ECHR because of the Good Friday Agreement. I can't help but feel you just don't carry on the violence of the Good Friday.
Was it Jack Straw that said recently you could?
Yes. I mean, most people seem to think you can, because I remind people, pieces of paper don't keep peace. Belief in the piece of paper keeps the peace.
Yeah.
That's what it is. If you don't want to start fighting again, you don't have to start fighting again because you don't have a piece of paper.
Yeah, fair point. Peter, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again. Peter Barnes, political strategist, with us on the programme. Over to you. We're going to cross to the States as well and talk to Michael Graham, our man over there on Capitol Hill. We'll get his view on what was happening, the sad death of Charlie Kirk yesterday while addressing students in Utah. 0344 499 1000. You can leave a voice note there as well, or you can message 87222.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One here comes in from, in fact, no name given on this. Firstly, RIP to Charlie and many thoughts to his family. Charlie gave people the platform to debate. I would often watch and form an opinion of my own, whether that was in agreement with Charlie or not. They've also lost a platform where they could voice their opinions. Charlie gave them that. And that's another curious element to all of this, of course. Charlie Kirk actually gave opinions to people who fundamentally disagreed with him. That was the whole point of, you know, the discourse and the debate that went with it. I loved it when people would say to him, you know, it's like, it upsets me. You're causing, your views I find upsetting. And he said, well, I don't care about that. And it's not when somebody says, I'm offended. Like, are we meant to care that you're offended? Who cares that you're offended? Nobody cares if you're offended. And what does that mean anyway? There's a great Australian comedian, can't remember his name now, does a whole routine about being offended. And what happened? Did your leg fall off when you got offended? No, nothing happened. That's what happened. Nothing, absolutely nothing. You've just built this kind of strange, dubious, bizarre, bonkers, quirky idea in your head that something happened to you and that deserves to be noted by others because you were offended. Get in the bin. I don't care about your offence. I said it at the beginning. That's why courtrooms, they don't decide court cases based on emotions. Otherwise, all manner of people would be sent to the chiller because somebody was upset by what happened. It doesn't work like that. And Charlie was just great at really illustrating that point and saying to people he was debating with, right, firstly, let's get rid of that because your emotions, your synthetic indignation do not count. Let's get to the facts, let's get to the science, let's get to the reality of all of this. This is of course, one of the worst pieces of news we've reported recently, based on a couple of things. Now, I'm getting a few messages, as you do, saying, you know, this is not, you know, a president, this is not a member of royalty, this is not some historic figure. No, it isn't. But Charlie Kirk is the embodiment of something more than that, and the assassination of him has been condemned worldwide. Even Keir Starmer declared there could be no justification for political violence, adding that we must all be free to debate openly and freely without fear. It's interesting coming from him. Meanwhile, Donald Trump called this a dark moment for America. The 31-year-old, a staunch ally of the president, was shot dead, of course, at a university event in Utah yesterday. Manhunt still underway to find the person responsible. Here's the moment that Kirk's death was announced on Fox News.
It is my great dishonor to be the person that says this and breaks this to you on television, but President Donald Trump is announcing on Truth Social, the great and even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me, and now he is no longer with us.
In a moment, we'll speak to Freedom campaigner Montgomery Toms. First, Michael Graham, US political commentator, managing editor of Inside Sources, our man that we speak to on all manner of issues. Didn't really expect Michael to be speaking on this one. Nobody could have written this. What a sad, grim and awful day.
And what makes it particularly awful for those of us who are engaged in politics and like politics is that Charlie Kirk, people on the left have acknowledged, was doing it right. He would go to universities and say to people who don't agree with me, change my mind. That was, and he would basically kind of a soapbox approach. And, you know, my background is talk radio. I spent 15 years doing talk radio, much of it in Boston, Massachusetts, as a conservative. And so I had a lot of people who disagreed. And the whole premise was, let's just talk, have a good time. Yeah. And Charlie Kirk lived by the motto that I have at the top of my Twitter, whatever, the slogan, you know, at the top of the page.
Yep.
And it just says, it doesn't bother me that you're wrong. Why are you so mad that I am? And the point is, so what? So you think I'm wrong? I think you're wrong. So what?
So
but in
what?
America at the moment, and I would argue that in the UK even more so, there is not that concept that it's okay for you to be wrong. When you're putting people in jail for saying wrong words, that's, you could argue, even a greater expression than a lone assassin killing this figure. The other thing I think I should point out, the people who say, who the heck is Charlie Kirk? Don't feel bad if you don't know who Charlie Kirk is. There are a lot of Americans who don't know him, because part of this, we have this, you know, the media have, you know, spread out, you know, it's fragmented. And so if you are someone like my son who listens to a lot of podcasts, if you're California liberal Governor Gavin Newsom's son, we found out when he had Charlie Kirk on his podcast, his son listened. He was very popular with a relatively narrow group of people, which is young conservatives, particularly young men 30 and under. But the reason why President Trump and Vice President Vance and other Republicans know him is this organization he started when he was 18 years old. Turning Point USA started organizing young conservatives on campuses and saying to them, basically, you're not alone. Yes, you're a minority, but you're not, you know, it feels like you're the only person who doesn't love Barack Obama on campus. You're the only person who's pro-life on campus. You're not alone. You're just outnumbered. And they turned those groups into political activists. They started turning out and voting. And there are members of Congress right now who will tell you the reason I won my very close election is an uptick of a couple of points of voters 30 and under, because TPUSA, Kirk's organization, turned them out. So when you actually start impacting elections, when you start moving voters, when you have states like Pennsylvania, which were, you know, viewed for a while as part of the blue wall, that are now about to become a majority Republican or more Republican registered voters than Democrats, TPUSA and Charlie Kirk are part of that movement of actual political mechanics. We combined, he had a, you know, media presence, he was a great debater, he was good on TV, but he actually did the work of organizing and building an infrastructure, which is far more impressive in Washington, D.C. than being able to mouth off on a podcast.
Where do you sense, Michael, there's lots of people have different views on this, that this kind of division in politics really kicked in? Because I said right at the beginning of the programme, we've sort of moved from a place where people just used to have a different opinion. They were those with opposing views. Now, people with opposing views are your enemy, not just any old enemy, an enemy you want dead. I mean, that never used to be. You look back to the Reagan era, even the Clinton era. I mean, I know there's always been mad nut jobs out there that will want to kill somebody for rather curious reasons. But generally speaking, what was the tipping point where we went from just someone with a different view to someone who was essentially the Antichrist?
A wiser and less arrogant person would say, oh, that's a difficult question. I'm going to tell you exactly the minute that it happened in the U.S. And that was the minute that the U.S. Supreme Court made George W. Bush president in 2001. That was the crack. And all of the other divides started with that crack. Not because the Supreme Court was right or wrong. I mean, it was a really messy situation.
Yeah.
520 votes in the state of Florida. I mean, it was, there was no win. But that crack, then amplified by the rise of new media, online media, Drudge would happen a few years later, or had just happened 2 years earlier. It all comes from there. There's just a fundamental distrust that social media has amplified. And now you have people living in silos, listening to other people, left and right, saying the other side, they worship Satan. Look, think about this. What is one of the conspiracy theories that is so ingrained on the right, despite overwhelming evidence that it's just not true? It's the idea that liberals, Democrats are raping children, that they have rape cages and whatnot, blah blah. It feeds into the Jeffrey Epstein thing. There's a whole social media silo where that's bandied around. And then on the other side, you've got they really are trying to bring back Hitler thinking, which of course is idiocy. And yet social media allows that idiotic theory to gain ground if you stay in your silo.
It's interesting because one of our commentators, Peter, that was just over here, of course, 24 years ago today, 9/11, we should also remember that. And I asked the same question to him. When did he think this kind of moment happened? And he identified the timescale in a similar way to you, but he said it was when Blair essentially wanted to go into Iraq, and obviously that was an American, British and other allies, all at the same time. Right. There was 1 million people march in this biggest march there's ever been. I know you have to be careful whether you just do you make policy by people marching, or do you have to have a focus? And I get it. Some people were pro that invasion, some were against it, but it did create, in the same way that those damaged Chads caused so much hassle down in the Sunshine State, over here. Blair going into war. There was lots of things happening in the UK Parliament. You had ministers reading out what they said was intelligence reports, and it turned out it was a dissertation from a student who went to some university somewhere. You remember Colin Powell with his, this is the stuff that is going to kill us, and it turned out there was all of that. So rightly or wrongly, whether Iraq invasion was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, it was a point of huge division, and maybe sowed those initial seeds of distrust.
Well, let me put these pieces together. I think that the force that has led us to where we are in politics in the West and the rise of populism, et cetera, is the premise that the elites carried with them after World War II, that I can just tell you what to do, and you're just going to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to decide what to do, and I'm going to do it. And by the way, if anything goes wrong, I don't get blamed for it. Your sons go fight the war. Your mom loses her mortgage in the collapse, whatever. And I'm still telling you what to do because I'm better, smarter than you. And what we really learned as a culture, once again, thanks in part to media dissemination, so we got to go past the gatekeepers, who also are part of the elites at the Times of London or New York Times, is that our elites suck. They're idiots. They're terrible. Yes. They got the Iraq War wrong. It's not the Iraq War good or bad. They just got it wrong. They did it wrong. They executed wrong. And one of the things that always frustrated me during the whole Iraq War is, during World War II, which was the easiest war to understand ever, the Nazis are coming and Japan invaded you. FDR felt the need to go on the radio regularly and say, look, let me tell you what's going on. Let me explain to you why I sent your sons to fight. You, as the average people, you need to understand. When did the West, when did Bush, Blair, when they say, look, I get that you're confused by the Iraq War. It's kind of confusing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to change the culture of the Middle East so we don't have another 50 years of suicide bombings and airplane hijackings. It's going to take, 2 decades. It's going to cost this. Let me explain to you why this will be worth it so your grandkids can grow up in a world where there is no Islamist terrorism. They didn't bother. They didn't. Their attitude was just like with the financial collapse and and 100 other decisions. COVID. I know what's going on. You're a bunch of dummies. Sit down and shut up. Takes us back to Charlie Kirk, whose attitude was the opposite. He's like, look, I get it. I'm an evangelical Christian in a secular world. I'm a young guy who's a conservative. You could even see far right in where I'm supposed to be a liberal. I actually am willing to say that people who say they're girls who are born boys are actually boys. Let me explain it to you.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. He went around explaining, and he didn't care if you thought he was an idiot. That was your problem.
Indeed.
I have my reasons. Here it is. Look at the difference in those two approaches to how we get along as a civil society.
Correct.
And ask yourself, which one will be better over the long term?
100%. Michael, it is a sad day, but I'm always grateful for your views, particularly on something like this. Michael Graham, US political commentator on the programme. Let's get a word from Montgomery Toms, Freedom Campaigner. Good afternoon to you, Montgomery.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on.
You know what it's like to be shouted at and ridiculed and lampooned. You mooch around the place often with a big old megaphone explaining what's right and what could be right and freedoms and all the rest of it. You're a man with big opinions. You're a young guy as well in your 20s. So this is, this is sort of familiar territory in some respects to you.
It's heartbreaking. And the thing is, something that Charlie has obviously done, which goes without saying really, is impacted the youth. And in the UK, that's why I aim to achieve. I want to awaken the youth to traditional conservative principles and the fact that we don't want to be censored and we need free speech and debate. That is something that I campaign for on a daily basis. I mean, this situation is beyond depressing. I've looked at Charlie Kirk as a role model for myself. And I'm sure many other young men in the UK have. What's really, really depressing, and you actually touched on it before I came on, is the fact that our Prime Minister has actually put a tweet out saying we must all be free to debate openly and freely without fear. Coming from that man, that has to be one of the most undermining, hypocritical statements of the year. That man would have had Charlie Kirk locked up in the UK if he was to do what he's done in America. And I myself was arrested recently for wearing a placard stating that to be trans is to have a mental illness. We have a massive attack on free speech, and now we've lost one of the original, you could say, kind of role models for debate in the US. So it's beyond upsetting, and the fact that we have so many people, call them left wing, call it what you want, on social media actually celebrating the fact that a man has been silenced with a bullet is just tells you the amount of evil that we have in this world.
The trouble is, I suppose, and I was touching on this with Alex Phillips, is that if you are of that disposition politically on the left, by this stage, you have so sufficiently reduced your opponent to the status of the Antichrist. They might as well be Chairman Mao or Idi Amin or Adolf Hitler all mixed into one. So you've othered them, as Peter Barnes said earlier. You've put them in a place where they are lower than a snake's belly, lower than a drop curb, all of that stuff. So you could do anything to those people because they're horrific people. They're the enemy. They're evil. And once you get to that stage, you're perfectly relaxed about, some guy gets shot. He's just a loudmouth 31-year-old right-winger. Who cares? He was the Antichrist. And these people are that twisted that that's kind of how they define this. And I would just add to that, they're helped along by people like John McDonnell and those people that want to call democratically elected politicians Nazis and scum and racist. They fuel that in these people.
No, you're absolutely right. And even in the UK, as I just go back to Starmer, he has fueled that. He's contributed to that culture of deeming individuals who just support free speech and traditional values as far right. I mean, I do think this goes beyond left and right wing. I think this is now a battle of good and evil. I mean, Charlie Kirk was an incredibly strong Christian, and you can't help but realize that I think this, as I say, goes beyond just the values of free speech and debate. And whilst that's obviously a key point here, it's also the case of saying that people have been hijacked. People have had their minds turned into this kind of soup of this dystopian chaos that apparently individuals who oppose just basic attacks on our freedom are suddenly far-right fascists that deserve to be killed. And look, people like myself, people like you, like we are now in a position where we're sort of looking over our shoulder and going, you know, who's next? We are seeing this rise in hatred, and we really do need to club together in unity and resist the temptation to fight amongst one another, because really we're at a kind of T-junction here 100%. As to what direction we want to go in.
Just a final point, Montgomery. You posted on X that you spoke to your dad. As usual, you wrote he expressed his concerns about my safety. He reminded me that I might push things too far in pursuit of my mission. Sometimes I become so focused on the principles of freedom that I put myself in harm's way regardless of the consequences. I mean, you did just touch on it there. I mean, some people would say when something like this happens, yes, you have to be aware that there are half-wits out there, and then there are lethal half-wits. But of course, you could argue that these kind of things embolden you to carry on.
Yeah, I think you make an incredibly important point, and I am emboldened, and I'm not in the slightest scared of carrying on in the fight for truth and freedom, especially in the UK. But it's just a stark reminder that I will sometimes walk into situations, regardless of the consequences, just holding on to my principles, and I'll get a phone call from friends or family, and they'll say, you know, you really took a risk there. And we see, you know, these members of Antifa, which have so much hatred and disgust at individuals like myself and others, that would be very willing to go to prison in the name of stabbing individuals or shooting individuals just to take down their opinions. And that's the reality. So no, I am emboldened, and we should keep fighting for free speech in the name of Charlie Kirk, and that is exactly what he would expect of young men especially. And he came over to the UK recently, and he made that point very clear, that we are responsible for bringing freedom to the US and pioneering freedom and democracy, and yet we're the ones that are now directly attacking it. So it's the responsibility of people like myself, you, and young men and young women across the UK and the US to keep fighting for freedom and free speech, because if we don't, we are going to go down George Orwell 1984. Yeah,
you're not wrong. Montgomery, we appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. Montgomery Toms, a young freedom campaigner himself, his views on what happened. Over to you shortly. This is Talk.
Because unfortunately this morning we're not going to be having a laugh, because we're going to be thinking about what happened last night, which was so horrible. I don't even know where to begin. Charlie Kirk, a right-wing polemicist, I suppose you might say, a bloke who started Turning Point in America, a guy who was, to all intents and purposes, just a very interesting thinker, a very interesting you know, argumentative type of person.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk. Oh, it is Talk, even. Thanks, Sam. It is 0344 499 1000. We've got microphones and everything here. We're brilliant. Welcome to the 21st century. Lots to get on with, and of course, loads of comment coming in from you. We are talking about the division in politics. How have we become so divided? What was the tipping point? How did that happen? Let's get a couple of voice notes on this very point. Here's one from Gladys.
You asked the question of when this division started. Started 2016, when the Brexit referendum came up with the wrong answer. The establishment refused to accept it, and that started a lot of bad blood and bad conversations. And then when Donald Trump won in 2016, the Democrats went out and said they would never accept him as a president. So it actually started 2016, and it's just gone downhill since.
Yeah, some go earlier than that, but 2016 fueled the whole thing, no doubt about it. Let's get one from Sean.
All this stuff started with Gordon Brown when he called the old lady a bigoted old woman years ago. It's been continued by every government up until this one, and it's been embraced by the media.
Been embraced by the media, yeah. And it's interesting that Montgomery Toms, our previous guest, he's only 20, for goodness sake. What a brilliantly spoken young man with big opinions. And you know what? He don't care if you don't agree with him. You can hate everything he said. That's fine. That's the purpose of all of this. He was suggesting that if you're trans, it's a mental illness, and he wore that on a kind of sandwich board to make the point. Might have disturbed some people. That was his view. Get arrested for that view, for God's sake. Arrested for something you wrote on Twitter that had no obvious and overt potential dangerous knock-on effects. Good Lord. 0344 499 1000. How has politics become so divided? We'll have more comment on that. We'll talk Peter Mandelson as well. Our lines are open right now. Let's get the news headlines at 2 o'clock.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. It is the home of common sense. As you've been hearing, a manhunt continues in the United States after Donald Trump's ally and conservative activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated in broad daylight during a college debate in Utah. This was an incredibly dark day for free speech and freedom of opinion. And we're asking the question, how has politics become so divided? It's happening over there, it's happening over here too. Also this afternoon, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has sacked Lord Mandelson as US ambassador after new emails revealed the full nature of his friendship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. This, by Mandelson's standards, is just an unbelievable howler on his part. The man with the antenna to die for when it comes to knowing where bear traps are found himself standing on the biggest one of all. He's walking the plank, and that lovely retirement gig has vanished, along with the palace and the chauffeured limousines. And Suella Braverman has challenged Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood to trigger Article 58 to exit the European Convention of Human Rights, declaring that the UK is at a moment of crisis, a crisis of security and trust. But will the Home Secretary be listening? We'll have more on that a little bit. 0344 499 1000. Some comments from you. Not once did anybody make an attempt on Biden or Kamala Harris's life, yet Biden and his team demonized people like Charlie and said they're a threat to democracy. We now know which side is the threat. I hope someone points this out and holds Democrats slightly responsible for this. God bless you, Charlie. Rest in peace. It's interesting, on that very point, Joe Biden did tweet that he was very, violence has no place in society. To be fair, he did also tweeted that when somebody tried to assassinate Donald Trump. But of course, if you're there is a line, if you're in opposition and you're running for an election, I'm not surprised that Joe Biden would say people like Donald Trump are a threat to democracy. Donald Trump would say that Joe Biden was a threat to democracy. I kind of get that. I think that's perfectly normal stuff, right? But what I did notice when Joe Biden put out a tweet yesterday saying that he was, sorry to have heard what had happened and thoughts and prayers are with Charlie Kirk's family, as soon as you click on the replies, it's horrific. Now, what's disappointing there is that is coming from people on the opposite side of the debate, saying, no, you're to blame for this, you should be dead as well, and things like that. Why is it so vile, bilious and evil? How did we get here? Where was the tipping point? Our lines are open on that. Now, less than 24 hours after Sir Keir Starmer backed at PMQs, Peter Mandelson has been sacked as British ambassador to the United States. Lord Mandelson said yesterday he deeply regretted continuing his association with Jeffrey Epstein, even after he'd been convicted of child sex crimes. Let's have a listen to the announcement as it happened this morning. This comes from the Minister of State for Europe, North America and UK Overseas Territory. You might be familiar with the name. It's an important job. Stephen Doherty is his name, Labour MP. Here's what he told the Commons.
In light of the additional information in emails written by Lord Mandelson, the Prime Minister asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw him as ambassador. That is very clear. The decision was taken by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, and those emails show that the depth and the extent of the relationship is materially different from that known at the time of his appointment.
That's what he had to say. Let's speak with Dennis McShane, former Labour MP and former Minister of State for Europe as well. Dennis, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Always nice to speak. It's like there's a bit of me that wanted to say, I don't want to make light of anything because there's some serious underpinnings to all of this, but it's Peter Mandelson. It's almost the story of Peter Mandelson. I'm waiting to find out this afternoon that he's just been appointed head of NASA or something, because that seems to be the boomerang prince. What he does, he goes and then he comes back again.
Couldn't agree more. When he had to reside over Hinduja passports,
yep.
I was in the House of Commons. He took his last questions and walked out, and the next thing he was resigned. And I went upstairs to the loo above the chamber where MPs can go with the Deputy Chief Whip Keith Hill. And I said, well, that's the third time Peter's had to leave. Is that it? You can't come back from the death a third time, can you? What do you reckon? And he said, oh, leave it 3 weeks. I mean, that was Peter. He was like a French cardinal in the 17th century, gliding through the corridors of power. But don't forget that he gave far more men and women the chance to be an MP than anybody else. I mean, along with Tony Blair and other people like Alistair Campbell, other great prime ministers like Clement Attlee, 5-6 years out, Wilson, 4 or 5 years out, Jim Callaghan, 4 years out. We had a very long-lasting Labour government. That's to do with lots of other people, Gordon Brown and a very good team of ministers. But Peter was the communications and one of the strategic geniuses behind it. So that's just the politics of it. What he was doing with Jeffrey Epstein, obviously we know he's gay, so he wasn't getting into the sort of, the Prince Andrew accusation stuff. But what on earth? There's some lots of both parties attracted to men of money, men of power, the cardinals and manipulators of public opinion. I prefer to go home, have a cup of tea, and read a Jeffrey Archer.
I bet you never said that out loud in the House of Commons. Certainly the last bit. But you're right on this, I sense, Dennis. And I mean, there's sort of two odd conflicting points here in a way, because this was the Svengali, the communicator. This man had a political antenna like very few did. He knew where every bear trap was. So it comes as somewhat of a surprise that he stood on the greatest bear trap, and that is, hanging around with a guy who had a very nefarious background, even after it came to light that he had a nefarious background. But of course, simultaneously, the other problem with Peter Mandelson is that he loved, taking tea with a Saudi prince, or, meeting the royals, or, he sort of loved spending time on yachts. That was very much him, wasn't it? And I guess that bit got the better of the other bit.
I think that's a fair point. Same problem with Boris Johnson, because the famous yacht you're referring to, of course, belonged to the son of a Putin KGB agent.
Yes, indeed.
Who Boris Johnson put in the House of Lords. And we've never had a full accounting of the £14 million that Boris raised from Putin oligarchs. No, I'm not saying for himself, but the dodgy money that flowed into London, particularly really after the Labour government, has never been properly accounted for. The Electoral Commission is just like a box of soaking wet tissues. It just never takes any real action. And Peter was in and out of there. I mean, his first great loss of office was because he'd borrowed money from a very rich Labour MP called Geoffrey Robinson, who made his money properly, wholly as an industrialist, all the rest of it. Peter wanted to upgrade his living accommodation. Geoffrey said, "Oh, you ought to have a house somewhere, Barons Court. Here's £400,000 at the time, a lot of money." Well, great. I mean, I wish I could have had that.
Yeah, it wasn't but he managed to play it rather well. Can he come back now, though, Dennis? I mean, I guess, the bit of Peter Mandelson's story, I can imagine he saw this as the ultimate retirement gig. You're the US, the ambassador in the US is, it's a nice job to have. You are mixing with only yesterday he was in the Oval Office with Trump for an hour. They seem to get on rather well, as it turned out. He's got a palace to live in. He's got a security detail and a chauffeur-driven car carrying him around the place. He would have loved this job. Now, just really only months in, he's gone.
Yes, but I remember Peter some time ago, he was tipped for ambassadorship in the US or maybe in Paris, and he said, "Oh, I don't want to be a hotel keeper, because trust me, I spent 8 years in the Foreign Office politically, and I became number 2 there, so I had all that chauffeur-driven cars and staying in the embassies. It's a rather sterile life. It's like staying in a grand, old-fashioned British Rail hotel in Newcastle in about 1960. You have very little power, because the heads of government only talk to the heads of government, and then a level below that, it's the real technical experts. Peter is an actor, and Donald Trump is an actor, and Peter obviously schmoozed him, And there's no doubt, despite the criticism, some of that benefited for some aspects of British policy, but Trump has been stiffing us solidly. I've got to be careful. Wait a minute, I want to go to America in a couple of weeks' time. The president has been taking decisions in the national interest of America that means that Britain and every European country now is looking down the barrel of Putin's guns, and we haven't got the ammunition to fire back. So on the big decisions, I don't think we've seen this administration standing shoulder to shoulder with Britain at all.
Yeah, and just a final point, Dennis, what does this say about the Prime Minister? He lost a Deputy Prime Minister last week. He's lost his ambassador to the United States this week. I mean, it's been a bit of a torrid time. Prior to that, of course, he'd lost the Homeless Minister after she made some people homeless. He lost the Corruption Minister after she was accused of corruption. I mean, it's been a pretty... This is all in 1 year, and what the heck's going on in your party?
A very good question. And all of us, we have a great ex-MPs WhatsApp group. I won't reveal what they say because it's probably unbroadcastable. Yep. And I get a lot of it some of it on the doorstep because I'm still out canvassing for Labour candidates in local council elections. But the focus they were angry with, the biggest single issue, was taking away the old age winter fuel allowance for pensioners. That was promoted by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, Sunday Times, Daily Telegraph, all the right wing, all the bog standard economists that we all respect, all said pensioners are as rich as Croesus, they don't need any of this money. All I can tell you was we lost election after election. I think we're going to hammering next May because of that one decision taken by people new in office who don't have a political feel. Tony Blair done nothing but politics since soon after leaving Oxford. So had Mandelson, so had I, so had Gordon Brown, so had David Blunkett, Harriet Harman. I think a difficulty with this government is that it doesn't have that political decades of losing elections as much as winning them. But finally, the answer to your question was, huge crisis in 1959 when the Chancellor and the first Chief Secretary of the Treasury left in opposition to Harold Macmillan's more generous social spending policies, which always causes trouble. And Harold Macmillan was getting a plane to Moscow. He's wearing a fur hat that he bought in the 1930s. And they said, in those days, weren't people like you, Prime Minister, do you have any comment to make on the resignation of your two most senior ministers? I don't really take a lot of interest in little local difficulties. Goodbye.
That's the way to do it, maybe. Maybe Mr. Starmer needs to take a leaf out of that book. Dennis McShane, thank you, sir. Great to have you on. He is, of course, former Labour Minister. He's Minister of State for Europe, former Labour MP, had a fairly checkered end to his career, as some of you may remember. Thank you to him. 0344 499 1000. Let's get some comment on what is going on in the world right now in terms of that big story from yesterday. Charlie Kirk murdered. Cold blood, broad daylight, university campus in Utah. It was horrific. This stuff is on social media. If you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And if you haven't seen it, please don't even search it out. It is horrible. It's a dad. He's 31. His family, his two little girls, were in the crowd as well when this happened. Where was the tipping point? Where was the point we became so divided on politics? Tarquin down in London. What are your thoughts on this, Tarquin? Good afternoon.
Ian, what a brilliant question. I think the truth answer to this is there are multiple tipping points, Ian. And I've just been scanning back through my, albeit a bit sketchy A-level history, going back quite a long time. And you could go back all the way to... was it Percival, the UK Prime Minister, was shot in the foyer of the House of Commons just after the Napoleonic Wars had come to an end. He was shot and murdered. That you could say, well, that was the beginning of post-Napoleonic modern times, or you could say, was it the Enoch Powell Rivers of Blood speech? Was that the split point where suddenly he became the new Adolf Hitler of 1968 onwards?
Yeah, there's lots of big moments, aren't there?
There are.
Although I would imagine, now it's interesting you made the Enoch Powell speech. I know he ultimately lost his job for that, didn't he?
Yeah.
But I would guess it. I mean, obviously there was no social media, there was no 24-hour TV at the time. I wonder if it was as controversial then as it is now.
It really was, I think, Ian. And I think the difference now, though, is, as Peter, your commentator earlier, so quite brilliantly said, kind of stole my thunder really when I originally phoned in, was that I think it wasn't one particular, even though we'd like it to be as black and white and binary as that, I think it really was. And I think Peter said this, it's been the amplification process of social media generically that's done this, because in days gone by, we'd only see the Powell speech possibly on BBC Two at midnight or Newsnight or so, whereas now it's on 24/7 rotation on multiple channels, isn't it?
I wonder if this is... I mean, obviously there's a distrust and a disconnect with politicians. You know, the Starmer thing is really interesting. I often look at somebody like my sister who doesn't really follow politics in any meaningful way. She wouldn't know half the names you or I would mention in a conversation, Tarquin. Yeah. However, you know, so therefore I don't imagine she probably... You know, who's the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer? What do you think of him? Oh, I don't know, probably all right, not sure really. I wonder how many people only think that. But I genuinely think this is, you know, we've really hit rock bottom with this particular Prime Minister. Is that because we overanalyse and constantly analyse what he's doing, what he's saying? We angle it to our own advantage depending where we sit politically. Is it that? And does politics therefore have to be about personality? Nigel Farage speaks the voice of the common man, as the phrase goes. There's many people out there that think Nigel Farage might say it, doesn't really mean it.
Oh, so many points in what you're saying there, Ian. I think the thing for me, let's maybe speak personally rather than trying to do like the analyst thing. What really hit me hard a couple of years ago was when Joe Brand said about throwing battery acid into the face of Nigel Farage. For me, that was the turning point. I thought, oh my God.
Interesting.
She just thought she's doing it to try and get a laugh out of her lefty fans. But what did she realise? Does she really want to blind and disfigure a man for his opinion? Yeah,
I spoke to somebody who's kind of in my industry, and they said, this was just a couple of days ago, Tarkin, and said, you know, so Nigel Farage could be the Prime Minister. Yes. And this person was almost discombobulating. And, you know, I thought, in a minute, I'm going to have to call a paramedic, you know, looked as if he was about to pass out. And I thought, mate, it's Nigel Farage. Disagree with him. You know, he's not going to kill you. I don't know what you think you'd be, we would elect. And really, can anything be any worse than we've currently got, if you want to look at it from that point of view?
Can I just make one final point?
Yeah, please do.
Move on. Yesterday, was it the day before? I think we need to have some sort of, I don't know what the parliamentary process is in, but almost like the equivalent to either a private member's bill or an early day motion or something into Parliament to say, listen, end of calling anyone Nazi, fascist, racist, and far-right thug. End of. Period. We stop that now, because that is what's fueling this.
Yeah, 100%. Well, if we can do it for we can have an Islamophobia law out there, which of course they want to happen. Maybe we can have one of those as well. Tarquin, great conversation as well. Interesting pinpointing, or trying to pinpoint where the rot kind of set in. And Peter Barnes, our earlier guest, said that, you know, he thinks the Iraq war was where the sort of disconnect happened between government and the electorate, that it was there. Others would, you know, I've got people saying, well, was it Margaret? If you're a lefty, you might think it's Margaret Thatcher. If you're on the right, you might think it's Tony Blair. Was it Brexit? Did it predate Brexit? Was it 9/11? Was it, as Michael Graham, our US commentator, said, George W. Bush getting elected in America, you know, hugely controversial. It went to court, you may remember, the damaged Chads and all that part of our political history, or America's political history. Was it there? Everyone's got their own kind of view. Maybe it's an amalgamation of kind of all of those moments, but the commonality there is they've all sort of happened in the last 25 years or thereabouts. Could it be that? And then, of course, to encapsulate it all, the manifestation of the anger, the divide, has been given a huge platform. Everyone has the mic, everyone has the conch. Social media. And then you see it writ large, and you can, in real time, see those opinions. When they're committed to paper, boy, do they look worse than when they're said out loud. 0344 499 1000.
because unfortunately this morning we're not going to be having a laugh because we're going to be thinking about what happened last night, which was so horrible. I don't even know where to begin. Charlie Kirk, a right-wing polemicist, I suppose you might say, a bloke who started Turning Point in America, a guy who was, to all intents and purposes, just a very interesting thinker, a very interesting, you know, argumentative type of person.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This.
Well, we return. There was a momentary technical glitch there. I don't know what happened, but we're working on it. But anyway, you can hear us. We're coming out loud and proud at this end, which is good. There is some breaking news on what happened yesterday in Utah. We hear from officials. They're currently giving an update on their investigation into the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They said that the weapon thought to have been used in the shooting has been found, but the suspect remains at large. I think they're following a sequence of cameras, CCTV, doorbells, and all sorts of other areas. And of course, we'll bring you an update when we know more. They say that the suspect appears to be of college age. So there will be, it appears to be of college age, which you kind of sense might come as no surprise to some. But someone who will undoubtedly get caught. If they don't damage themselves beforehand, and then spends the rest of their life in jail. I mean, the futility of all of this is, and the families involved, you know, no one wants to think of a perpetrator and shed any tears. But if you want to kind of objectively try and analyse the fuller picture of when mad things happen and the kind of tentacles of that story, and then you get into everything from the victim and family and knock-on effects and friends and witnesses and people who saw this. And then you even, you know, you're forced to look at the perpetrator. You know, forget, no one's going to cry any tears. For that person, their family, absolutely wrecked for the remainder of time. Siblings, absolutely. Parents, you know, never. It's just, all of this is over a difference of an opinion. The carnage, the fallout, it's vast. Dave in South Gloucestershire says, for goodness sake, we can't have any discussion with a Labour person without them turning any conversation to, of course, so-and-so Conservatives did this, or that, because he mentioned the Boris Johnson thing. The inference being, but they were bad too, and we're not as bad. No, you're a damn sight worse. The arrogance, hypocrisy and delusion of the left-wing politicians and commentators and their refusal to accept reality has no bounds. And of course, what makes it particularly, I agree with Dave, it is that the left dine out on being not just right, they believe as in correct, but morally correct. And that's the problem. That's why this is so darn irksome, these conversations with lefties. It's like, no, we're right. We're morally right. We've got the side of God when we say stuff. That was also a technical hitch, but don't worry. Stuff happens. We're back. I nearly jumped out my skin then. Scott's in Essex. Scott, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Main thing is you'll never know where this all started because it happened in silence, meaning when one side of a conversation was shut down. We're not allowed to have a conversation. We're only allowed to spout the narrative, be it the right-wing narrative or the left-wing narrative, most of it always being the left-wing, because if you ever disagree, they get very violent very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I can explain it, rather technical, and it goes into psychology. Basically, it goes along the lines of groupthink. you must conform, you must comply, or you're outside the group. And if you're outside the group, you're a dissident. And if you're a dissident, you're a danger. And if you're a danger, you must be excluded. This is the mind think of very arrogant people, narcissists as such. So you cannot have a conversation which does not conform. And in our schools, we are no longer allowed a conversation of two parts. We are only allowed to give a single narrative in schools, in society, in our political groups. No one knows how to talk anymore. If you try and have a conversation, people go, oh, I don't know how to handle this. I don't have the information to put my perspective forward. So since I can't vocate what I wish to discuss, I'll let my fists do the talking instead. And this is something that is becoming prevalent both in Europe, in America, and around the world.
We also have a curious, and I find this infuriating because it happens on air quite a bit, but it happens, you know, even with mates in the pub. For example, if I say anything positive about Donald Trump, I am therefore a Trump diehard, irrational defender. If I say anything negative about Donald Trump, I must therefore be a Joe Biden supporter. Well, that's more extraordinary. I don't know how somebody gets from that to that, but they do. We put people in boxes, right? We're more comfortable by having sort of titles. So I said to somebody recently, it's actually in my own kitchen, when they said to me, when they said, oh, Donald Trump told people to drink bleach to get rid of COVID. And I said, no, he didn't actually. And she said, yes, he did. I saw it. Well, you didn't see that because he didn't say that. What you're probably aware as well, Scott, of the moment I'm talking about, but he didn't actually say people should. But that was enough for me to therefore be defined as deranged because I was somehow, she believed, you're defending Trump. And I said, no, I'm not defending Trump. And then there was a look of like, I think you probably are. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to get the facts out there. Forget what you think you saw or your interpretation of what you saw. I was just factually telling you what he actually said. And it was still a silly thing to say, by the way, but what he said was very different to what she said. So therefore, I become this mad Trump supporter. I'm deranged as well as him.
But it is the thing that as soon as someone can get to a point where they can say, oh, you have said this, you have said that, therefore anything you say must be discarded.
Correct.
And they'll use the Islamophobes. They start calling right-wing people Nazis and fascists, where Nazis was a socialist ideology and fascists came out of fascist Spain. Yeah. Or was it Italy? Italy. So it's, where is the association with these groups with capitalism? There's none, but there's this movement to say, take all these really bad names and constantly throw it at anyone who's identified as right-wing.
Correct.
Or doesn't agree with us.
Good point.
They don't agree with us. They're the evil.
They're the evil. You see, that's it. That's why it becomes easy to malign and beat up and throw milkshakes at people at best and put a bullet in the side of their head at a college campus at worst. Scott, you've been great. Thank you very much indeed for that. It is the sort of, you've got to be, if you don't sort of plant your colour, seeds of allegiance. The Trump thing is fascinating. I think the weirdest one, look, these people often would have just been written off as oddballs and like not very intelligent. I remember saying something about not being a super worshipper of Donald Trump, and a guy challenged me. Well, he didn't really challenge me. He was just an idiot. But he said, "So you're a Biden supporter?" And I said, "No, actually, Ron DeSantis is probably more." If you want to look at it this way, possibly more right-wing, certainly at the time, than Donald Trump. He said, well, you must be Biden. There's only two of them in the election. You've got to be one or the other. It's like, what? I have to be one or the other. I've got what, legally I do? You have to be one or the other? Well, actually, there's loads of other people that you could prefer. They might not even be running for the election, or they might have started running, got knocked out on the way. DeSantis being an obvious example. But it is that idea that you said something about somebody I love, so therefore, if it's negative, you therefore must be, I'm going to write you off and malign you, and I can do so with impunity. Because you're wrong and you're morally wrong. It's just bonkers. And it happens on the left and the right as well. But this is mostly a disease that comes by a country mile. It comes from the left, 100%. And that's for Sophie, who tweeted and said, please can you stop saying 100%? It's so annoying. I'm 99% sure I can probably do that. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This comes from Steve in Bromsgrove, who says Montgomery, earlier guest of ours, said something that is most pertinent. This is no longer about left or right, it's about belief systems, it's about Christian values, family independence, small state, low tax, community support and pride in our country. And I made that point a little earlier on, that if you look at Charlie Kirk, who was essentially a fairly odd, despite this library of opinions that he carried around with him, he was largely a fairly straightforward guy. He was a middle-class, 31-year-old father of two from Illinois. He was big on family values. He the unity of marriage, the responsibility of community, the adherence to law. There's nothing weird about this, by the way. But of course, it was all defined as being like, oh my goodness, who's this mad right-winger? How dare he talk about the wonderful institution of marriage or law and order? How dare he have a different opinion to my, I believe there's 237 different genders, etc. But of course, he was defined by the left as an utter bonkers madman who had no right to oxygen, and somebody took that to its ultimate conclusion. The police, as we said earlier, do have some information. They are following up, but at the moment it's sketchy. They believe that the perpetrator of this horrendous murder is possibly of college age, which tells us something but doesn't yet tell us who it is. Back to domestic matters. Suella Braverman has challenged Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood to trigger Article 58 to exit the European Convention of Human Rights. Yes, that big old barrier that stands in the way of almost everything in British life at the moment. Braverman, of course, herself, a former Home Secretary, says the UK is at a moment of crisis, a crisis of security and a crisis of trust. Her comments come as Cabinet Minister Lord Hermer said leaving the treaty would actually harm the government's efforts to end the Channel crisis. I think the general rule of thumb is that if Lord Hermer said it, then probably think the very opposite. Maybe I'm being unfair. Richard Tice is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Richard.
Good afternoon, Ian. You've literally just taken the words right out of my mouth. That's
apologise.
exactly what I said. That's what I said at the press conference that I was privileged and honoured to attend alongside Suella Braverman and Lord David Frost. And that was one of the things I said, if Hermer disagrees with it, then
you'll be on the right side of history if you take the opposing view. And it's a very detailed paper that Suella Braverman has put out with the Prosperity Institute, big attended press conference, lots of press there, and it sets out a clear, detailed roadmap how you get to the destination.
And it's interesting this because Suella Braverman has, she left office, of course, as Home Secretary. She wrote in her letter to Rishi Sunak. I mean, it was a very revealing letter, constantly making the point that she had tried to, go further on things like illegal immigration, and felt that she was cut off at the pass every step of the way. Lots of people have speculated since then, well, she's clearly going to join Reform UK. I mean, you might be able to give us a word on that. Is there a secret? Is there a secret conversation happening? We know her husband jumped the fence. Is she coming anytime soon, Richard? Is it this afternoon or tomorrow?
Well, there's an old expression. I mean, share and share alike. You got the husband on one side and the wife on the other. Look, Suella was obviously asked that by the press, and she, I'm obviously with Reform. She confirmed that she's a Conservative and she's not defecting. But you can work together on cross-party issues. Believe it or not, there's a couple of issues where I've been working with Lib Dem MPs and Labour MPs on specific issues. And this is one of those specific issues where 2 or 3 years ago, you weren't really allowed to talk about leaving the ECHR. You'd be cancelled or taken away by the gentlemen or women in white coats. Now we've moved the Overton window, where actually the discussion really is we should probably leave. So actually, how do you do it? What are the consequences? How long does it take? And so on. And so this was really the first detailed look at that. And there's been a great lie that has been out there, which we've now basically exposed, which was that the progressive left said, well, you can't leave the ECHR because it would upset the Good Friday Agreement.
That's nonsense, right?
But it is nonsense, because when you actually read the Good Friday Agreement, it doesn't say anything of the sort. It doesn't say the UK has to remain in the ECHR, and we're perfectly entitled to leave. So the reference to the ECHR only refers to domestic legislation produced and within Stormont, within the Northern Ireland Assembly, for Northern Ireland. And so, and there's also another thing here, which is that the Good Friday Agreement has already been amended a number of times unilaterally by the UK government. So this idea that it's preserved in aspect for time immemorial is also bunkum. But that's what happens. They spin this misinformation, this fibs, to the point where you just take it as, well, it must have come from a very seasoned lawyer or KC, and therefore you trust it. Well, actually, good lawyers can argue both sides of the same coin.
I'm utterly fascinated. We've been talking, obviously, about what happened in America last night, and it's naturally fueled the question about how politics became so divided. And I've always been fascinated, Richard. I think I said this to you a number of years ago about the whole kind of groupthink problem that has happened, the sort of status quo love is. And, we mentioned Lord Hermer, Shagos Dick, as my friend referred to him as quite recently, which might be fairly apt for a number of reasons. But he is absolutely the sort of totemic, the archetypal problem on things like this, isn't it? This is a man that loves the whole kind of the continuation of the status quo, the groupthink thing. And they do this with a feeling of righteousness, that they are correct and everybody else is completely wrong. I don't dispute Lord Hermer thinks it is preposterous to leave the ECHR, because his brain can't think outside of that.
I just remind people, our most important security and defence partnership is what's called the Five Eyes Partnership with the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. 5 of us. Only the UK is a member of the ECHR. Those are the 4 great nations, very successful, strong human rights records. They're not members of the ECHR. And if you're a sovereign independent nation, then you want your own parliamentarians elected by the voters to pass laws that judges domestically, only domestically, They should rule on the laws that are passed by Parliament. And what they should not do is interpret those laws using their own bias. And that's what's been happening. So, and the impact is not just infuriating on the inability to deport foreign criminals, inability to deport illegal boat crossings. It's also actually with regard to defence. So Ben Wallace, previous Defence Secretary, he's written that it impacts, the ECHR impacts on the ability of special forces to carry out certain operations in the appropriate way. And this is just untenable. Climate change, the whole net zero stuff. We've got the what I call the net zero nutters using the courts to say that XYZ hasn't complied with the Climate Change Act, and therefore it's not allowed, and that then goes all the way to the ECHR. And we've got basically what we call lawfare, where through judicial reviews and other things, we're trapped by these lawyers, and it's got to stop. It's because there is a direct link between the ECHR, the Human Rights Act, the reduction in our growth in GDP in the last 20 years, and the reduction in our productivity, as the lawyers have got very rich and the rest of us have got poorer.
And am I right in saying, Richard, it was Jack Straw last week that also supported that point that you've just raised, that actually the ECHR and Good Friday Agreement, there's no sticking point there.
Correct, and that's a remarkable intervention.
Correct.
Because he's a very senior politician, regardless of his political persuasion. He happens to be Labour, but he was a Home Secretary for, I think, a number of years, highly regarded. And so I think when someone of his ilk says the same, then that reinforces the point.
And on that point, Richard, always great to have you on. Let's speak again very soon. Richard Tice is, of course, Deputy Leader of Reform UK on that Suella Braverman challenging the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, to trigger Article 58 to exit the ECHR. They always go, oh, it's only you're being good company with Russia and Belarus or something of that nature. But as Richard pointed out there, well, there's quite a lot of countries around the world, our biggest allies, who are not in the ECHR. You look at United States would be an obvious example. Ian in Glasgow says, please keep saying 100%. Nothing wrong with having a good catchphrase. Do you know, I didn't even realise I'd said it. There's a lot of things I know I say, man alive, I know I say, but I hadn't, with the 100%, it's a good point. Yeah, and I am about, listen, Ian in Glasgow, I'm 102% sure I can keep on saying 100%. This one comes from Tony, great show, just listening and wondered why nobody in the media seems to be covering the story of the poor Ukrainian woman who was murdered in America. That is a horrendous story. And again, I haven't seen the social media. I don't know how that stuff gets, well, you kind of do, but you sort of wish you didn't know how that stuff gets on social media, the full barbaric version of what happened to poor Irina, I think her name was. I haven't seen that footage, and I don't think I want to see that footage. It's, again, people seek it out. Do you know what? I got an email from my kid's school this morning about the Charlie Kirk footage. And this is a new one on me as a kid at secondary school, but the email came through and essentially said that there is a there it is. I can just read you a little bit of it. We want to make sure that you're aware. We have been advised that there are currently some very graphic and distressing images, videos circulating online relating to the death of Charlie Kirk. Unfortunately, we understand that some students may have come across this content outside of school and could be discussing it or sharing it with their peers. If you've got any concerns, please don't hesitate to contact the school. Head of year, myself, are available to support both students and families. Obviously, I won't read the names involved. And I just thought, I don't, my kid's in year 7. He literally just started. They can't have smartphones at that age. I don't want him to see that. I don't want to live in a world where that stuff is normal. I know I can't control it, and I know, you can't put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to social media, online content, etc. And at some point he's going to come across distressing stuff. Many kids who are now, in their 20s will go, yeah, I saw that when I was 15, 14. Bit grim, didn't harm me. I just think it's quite sad that we're in that place. I don't want to watch my child to watch the murder of a woman that was stabbed and had her throat cut on a bus, or a Conservative commentator where somebody essentially shot him in the head or the neck, as it turned out. I don't want that. Anne's in Derbyshire. Anne, what's going on with our system? Where was the tipping point of divide? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Hi. Yeah, it's been a really great talk today, and I'd just like to send condolence to Charlie Kirk. He really was something. I really did admire him, and I think he does speak for a lot of people. Yeah. And I actually generally do think it is down to politicians. They have really chosen certain groups and worked with their narrative to sort of get into power, and obviously given them something a little bit back, and it's just got out of control. And when I'm talking about politicians, I'm talking about more of the Labour left side of politicians, how they've gone too far. This is a real turning point for the world now, I think, with Charlie and the Ukrainian lady. And how many incidents are we going to have to keep occurring for these people that keep dividing? It's just, where does it end? Like Donald said, it has to stop now, because it can't continue. Yeah. It really can't.
There's a lot of hysteria, isn't there? And I know I'm bound to say this. I think that hysteria comes mostly from the left, and I think some of the, but of course not exclusively. I understand that. That Jo Cox lost her life again in broad daylight because of some mad, in this case, right-wing nutter who decided he didn't like people of her ilk, or he wanted to make that point. I'm sure there's other reasons behind it as well. But broadly speaking, I think it's a contagion on the left of politics more so than anywhere else, Anne. But, politicians and speakers getting cut down in the street at a rally in the 25th, it's something that might have happened years ago, you sort of sense, right? It shouldn't be happening now.
Well, no, it shouldn't. I mean, I like to think that we live in a world where, it should... I mean, really, there shouldn't be any wars. It's not necessary to have any wars. There's no need for it. But you realistically, speaking to other people, you've got two groups of people at the moment that seem to be on side with one another, and everyone sort of knows who these groups are, which doesn't make sense. And it's becoming savage, and it's just causing racism. It's causing not hatred from myself, but obviously hatred from the other. Some of the comments I read online about Charlie, it's them comments that are causing divide.
It's incredible. I mean, who the heck do they think they're talking about, for God's sake? It's a Christian conservative bloke who was a right-wing supporter. He was a right-winger, if you want to put it that way. That sounded wrong, a right-winger, but you know what I mean. He was a right-wing conservative Christian. So what?
Yeah.
So what? And yet that was enough for somebody, by the looks of things. I mean, I doubt we'll find out that there was some other reason behind the motivation, but that's certainly how it seems to me. We'll have more from you on the way shortly. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
you know when there's always sort of something lurking in the background from how can they just go, right, it's just like a father and son meeting, there's been some bad blood, how do we then just sort of get it out in the open? And that's what is needed. But and it is probably a relief that actually there's no Meghan lurking in the back, when he goes back to his hotel tonight. Okay, he might get on the phone to her and talk to her about it, but hopefully that's where it will end.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This guy, do you know what? I tell you what happened there. There's a work experience person who's meant to plug the microphone in. They didn't plug the microphone in. Sit over there. Good Lord. This came in from Heather, who says, what we need are debates in schools, colleges and universities, and open debates in peaceful way. To have the freedom of speech with respect. It's OK to agree to disagree in dialogue of issues. And that's the irony, and thank you, Heather, for that. The irony, of course, that Charlie Kirk did exactly that most of his time. He was mostly known for going around universities and schools to try and initiate these debates, and also to tell people, particularly, kids who are sort of growing up in a very, what he felt, and many others share, was a sort of very indoctrinated kind of narrative about, again, goes back to groupthink and around education. And if kids came out, kids are perhaps, historically have been a bit more to the left, and there's some kids who are a bit to the right and they're having a hard time. He says there's nothing wrong with being, right-wing, by the way. If you look at the basic tenets of right-wing thinking, you'll find that most people, left or right, would end up agreeing with them. James is down in London on this whole story. James, what do you think?
I'm trying to contain my anger, to be honest with you, Ian. Look, Charlie Kirk was a young man, married, 31 years of age, with two young children. He had fantastic moral principles. All he wanted to do was go out and have a conversation. Oh, and do you know what made me? I turned my radio off when you started, Ian, because what you said is that you disagreed with 80% of what Charlie had to say. So there'd be a lot of meat there for you to tell me. What did you disagree with? Because I find it hard.
No, I said
what Charlie said.
No, you completely missed what I said. I said most people would agree with 80% of what he says.
Okay. I misheard that because literally
the very opposite.
The rage in me is beyond belief.
But what if but the point is, what if I did disagree with 80% of what he said?
Then I would have this conversation with you. That's what I just said. Can you tell me, because if you're saying there's 80%, there's a lot of meat there. So if you could tell me what it is that you disagree with him. And that's what Charlie was about. And what makes me sick is we've got these people on the left and in the United Kingdom as well who are posting these videos on YouTube and on TikTok. And that all that you're doing is demonstrating what you are. You are not human beings. If you think that you can go out and celebrate another human being's death because you disagree with what he has got to say, then you are nothing more than an immoral imposter. And I got nothing to do with these people. As far as I'm concerned, it's Charlie Kirk. You've gone to Jesus, where you belong, and God bless your family, young man.
There it is. James, thank you very much indeed for that. That's James down in London. It's kind of interesting what James started off with. He said that I had to... He thought I said I personally disagree with 80% of what Charlie Kirk said, which I did. I said the very opposite to that, that most people would agree with 80% of what he said. But then he said, well, I had to turn the radio off. I'm so angry. And that's fine. That would be your... I don't think he did, by the way. People often say that. They don't usually do that because he then called up to talk about it. But it is kind of interesting, the level of anger he said he felt when he thought I had a different opinion. And then when I told him I didn't have a different opinion, he was kind of, oh, right, OK, thank God, that's all right, thank you. But if I did have it doesn't matter if somebody has a different opinion. I didn't think Charlie Kirk was even controversial in most of what he said. He did dip his toe, I said at the beginning, he did dip his toe into the odd conspiratorial puddle here and there, and I think he'd acknowledged as much, you know, rigged elections and a few things about Obama, whatever, you know. And you know what? That's not ideal. And who is ideal, for God's sake? Who doesn't make a blunder or who doesn't say so? Are we all meant to, like here, and this again is another one of the problems, you have to agree with everything a person says. That's the other thing I've never got. So here's Donald Trump. There's 4 things I think are great about Donald Trump. There's one thing I think is not so great. You're a dead man. If a Trump fanboy hears you say you're dead, you might as well just say, you know, I hate everything about Donald Trump. You've got to have the full hand, the full suite, the full complement. Again, but it's all about the whole issue, the overarching issue we're talking about here, the fundamentals of freedom of speech and how we became so divided. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. Let's get the news now right here on Talk. The time, 3 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back to the home of common sense. We are, of course, reflecting and also discussing the ramifications after the assassination of Conservative influencer Charlie Kirk has drawn worldwide condemnation. Prime Minister Keir Starmer declaring there can be no justification for political violence and we must all be free to debate openly and freely without fear. I think some people will find those to be interesting words coming from our own Prime Minister, given some of the things we have seen under his watch and previous administrations' watch as well. Yeah, I get it as well. Not just him. 0344 499 1000. It's begged the question about how we've become so polarised when it comes to political debate. What was the point in time that we hit? Also this afternoon, a manhunt continues for the man responsible, with authorities saying he is believed to be of college age. That narrows it down somewhat, but there's thousands they're looking, thousands of people out there that would include, and they are looking to see if they can establish a trail. The weapon suspected to have been used in the shooting has been found. And as you've been hearing, Keir Starmer has sacked Lord Mandelson finally as the US ambassador to the as the UK ambassador to the US, after new emails revealed the full nature of his friendship with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. It was only 24 hours ago that Keir Starmer said, "I have complete faith in Peter Mandelson." I'm kind of intrigued by that advice, how he was given that advice, by the way, at PMQs, to even say he had complete faith. It was pretty obvious at that point that this was probably going to go only in one direction. Certainly, I think that's how it looked to most people. Interesting times. This one comes from John. There's a good conservative theory that the TV show Glee didn't create wokeness, but it amplified progressive conversations and made them mainstream. The show pushed themes of diversity, inclusion and social justice onto primetime TV at exactly the same time social media was exploding. That combination gave those ideas a megaphone and arguably shifted the cultural conversation faster than it might have done otherwise. That's an interesting point. Although the only thing I'd say is that, most people probably didn't watch Glee. It was big, but it was big within that group. But, yeah, what probably happened is others followed the theme of Glee. So it was all down to Glee. I love that theory. Rain in Link says, Starmer must be exhausted. The hits just keep on coming. Yeah, it's been an exhausting week. Angela Rayner, Lord Mandelson. It's a grim old time out there for Keir Starmer. Can he survive? Well, who knows? Let's go back to our main story here this afternoon on Talk. A rifle has been found, though a suspect is still on the run after Charlie Kirk's death yesterday. The 31-year-old, seen as a key to galvanising the youth vote among Donald Trump's supporters, was killed at a university event last night. Now, we've seen the footage. We know what's being said so far, but let's get the latest from Robert Bowles, who's an FBI agent.
This morning I can tell you that we have recovered what we believe is the weapon that was used in yesterday's shooting. It is a high-powered bolt-action rifle. That rifle was recovered in a wooded area where the shooter had fled. The FBI laboratory will be analyzing this weapon. Investigators have also collected footwear impression, a palm print, and forearm imprints for analysis. Now, I understand there are a lot of questions about motive. I assure you that all leads, tips are being fully investigated. The FBI has brought every resource to bear, and we will continue to do so throughout the course of this investigation.
So that is the latest that we're hearing. In a moment, we'll chat to Patrick Timms, spokesman for Turning Point UK. And of course, many of you will be aware that Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk was one of the founders of that organisation back in 2012. Let's first speak to Scarlett Howes, US editor at The Sun, who is in Utah. Scarlett, good afternoon to you. I mean, we can't really overstate the horror of what happened here, what it represents, certainly to America and the wider world in terms of freedom of speech and the ability to talk to opponents. It covers and ticks all of those boxes. An awfully sad day, and I think mostly, there are some exceptions, but it's mostly been acknowledged across the political spectrum, the horror of what happened to Charlie Kirk yesterday.
Yes, I think that despite your political beliefs, I think that everybody can come together and agree that this is a truly traumatic and horrific event. And I saw that yesterday, actually. I was actually one of the first reporters to attend the scene. I was already in Utah, and I heard about what had happened, and I rushed to the scene. And, all of the students, there were students who agreed with his views, students who didn't agree with his views, and I really saw that how they came together in that moment to to really reflect on what had happened. It was quite shocking to see, how affected they were by what, by what had occurred. But it was also touching to see how students had, students who perhaps aren't politically aligned actually came together to lay flowers and talk about what had happened. But no, it was incredibly shocking. And what was most shocking as well was the fact that we all believed that they had caught the person who had done the crime. So we believed that they had caught this this man, and there was videos of him that he'd been arrested, he was in custody. And then, all of a sudden, dramatically, people were being evacuated from other areas of the campus after being told by police that actually the shooter may still be on the loose because they got the wrong man. So that was quite...
that was a moment. There was a man being carried away in handcuffs. I think his trousers had fallen down or something, and it was just and it looked like, wow, this looks like a sort of 70-odd-year-old man being taken away here, but that turned out to be nothing. And of course, as we were saying a moment ago, and we heard from the FBI agent, Scarlett, that, this is now ongoing. They think this person was of a student age, so he would be sort of early, around about the 20-year-old kind of mark. One would think on one hand, depends on how many cop shows you want to believe, that, at some point they are going to find this person. But, who knows? This is difficult stuff. I know the police are chasing CCTV and the like, but this won't be the work of a moment.
No, I think the police will. I have hope that the police will find the shooter. There's been a lot of talk, especially particularly online, that this was a professional hit. And I think now, after this press conference, that we can determine that it wasn't. It was as you said, a person of a college age. They do have some good leads. They've got a footprint, a palm print. They have quite a lot of footage. And they've got the gun as well that's been recovered in the woods nearby the neighbourhood. Obviously, yes, there's lots of people of that age. He was dressed in black. We know it's a man. He was dressed in black. So it's quite hard to determine probably any physical features. But I think that police are saying that they're going around to, for example, neighbours, trying to see images on Ring doorbells. In the past, we know that that one image can actually crack the case. So let's hope they do find that.
Indeed. Well, let's certainly hope so. Listen, Scarlett, thank you for coming on. This Scarlett Howes is the US editor at The Sun, who is in Utah at the moment. Let's get a word with Patrick Timms, who's a spokesman for Turning Point UK. Patrick, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, sir.
I made the point just in the introduction, of course, that Charlie Kirk was one of the founders of Turning Point in America. Let's call it the sort of Turning Point family, if you like, for the benefit of this. This is a devastating time for everybody, but a devastating time for this organisation too, of which he was such an integral part.
Well, absolutely. And look, what I'm going to just say now is I'm a linguist. I'm a translator. I get paid for my use of words. But actually, there are no words. For the anguish that people are feeling over on this side of things at the moment. At the end of the day, Charlie was a peaceful man. He believed that wars should be fought with words and not weapons. And what was he doing at the time when he was murdered? And we are clear at Turning Point, he was murdered. What was he doing? He was doing exactly that on a university campus. I knew Charlie. I met him in 2019 at a dinner. Now, he had a large operation going in America, but he also was instrumental in setting up the TPUK, as we call it, the Turning Point UK branch of that operation. Now, I worked with them for some time. I now do some ancillary work. Some people are even saying, oh, what a coincidence it is that it's happened the day before what would have been the anniversary, or is the anniversary, of 9/11. So whether that had anything to do with it. But all I can say to you is that our prayers are going out to the fact that what has happened here is a man has lost his life, a wife has lost her husband, and 2 children will now grow up without a father. And when we consider what people are apparently willing to do because they don't like the words that somebody says, this is the result. And the irony of it all is that Charlie, like I say, he was a peaceful man. He always offered a platform to other people. He wanted to hear words. He would often vehemently disagree with them, and I will say that his tone and style could be a bit strident at times. But that is not a reason for a man to die.
Correct.
And indeed, we find now that other people, I mean, look, I've been a victim of, I've spoken about this on this station before. I too have been a victim of far left violence. It didn't actually kill me, but, you know, I have been a victim of that. And we have to bear in mind that for some people, we don't know. We were just talking about, as you were talking about Scarlett before, you know, we don't know the identity of the killer yet. But what we do know is that some people apparently think that disagreeing with someone is enough of a justification to murder them. Charlie never thought that. And that was why he founded the Turning Point movement, either over there or over here, in the first place.
We are in a sort of extraordinary times in terms of this kind of crass polarity of how people opine and form views. We've been throwing out the question this afternoon, Patrick, about where was the tipping point on this? How did politics become so divided? Can you shine some light, your own view on whether there was a moment or a group of moments that collectively sort of began this grim journey where people don't just have a different opinion, they become your enemy. And if you have a different view to me, you're the Antichrist. When was that?
Well, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to refer to something that Penny Mordaunt wrote. You're going to think I'm segueing, but I'm actually not. About Brexit being, if it wasn't allowed to be a moment, it would have to become an event. Or sort of, well, there was that. There was the other way around. It can't be. If it can't be a series of moments that lead to something, then eventually there becomes an event. Now, over in the US, I think a lot of people have been have felt very badly about the re-election of Donald Trump as president, and have also found themselves not being very comfortable with the kind of student activism that we see on campus. And in fact, that's actually what Turning Point does. It's about going out there, promoting debate, and listening to arguments. The thing with Charlie Kirk, he always listened to arguments. He was right there in a tent that says, "Prove me wrong." Okay, so this was always about listening to other people. I will say, having met him, Charlie had views that could be described as strident, and that's a polite term. Yeah. But he always listened. You're asking me when this happened. Like I say, I don't think it's an event that just happened at a particular point in time. I think there's been a progression here of people, certain people of various different dispositions, becoming less and less and less content, and eventually deciding to take action. With that said, there are no diagnoses here of what happened other than what I could only describe as genuine mental illness. I am not excusing the attacker.
Yeah,
I am not. And like I say, we are all here. I mean, in our time, as in time zone, I only started hearing about this about 10:30 last night. And since then, I've been in discussions with the leadership. Nobody really knows what to do in this kind of situation. And that's worth pointing out as well. Nobody really knows what to do. Our response is to say, I'm not even going to use silly words like "we condemn this" because it's just so plain. It's just so generic. Yeah. Obviously we condemn it, but what we don't want to see is reprisals. We don't.
Yeah, 100%, because that can also happen at times like this. And I was looking at, at the Twitter feed where Joe Biden had offered his condolences and said there's no place for this. And I thought, well, fair play. You could argue, of course he was going to do that. And then straight away there were people commenting on that saying, wishing him dead. And I thought, well, hang on, this is ridiculous. This is you can't occupy the moral high ground saying, these people are bonkers who have these views and then simultaneously have the same view. It's this divide. It's created this curious place that we found ourselves in, and I think the left are far more guilty, by the way, by a country mile of this. It's almost in their DNA, but once in a while it does creep onto the other side too. But you're absolutely right, and thank you, Patrick, for being with us. Patrick Timms, spokesperson for Turning Point UK. It's worth saying that Turning Point USA was Charlie Kirk was one of the founders of that organisation. We'll talk to Liam in Liverpool now. Liam, how are you doing?
Afternoon, Ian. You okay?
Afternoon. Yeah, good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
So it's not picking up on where he left off, your last guest. I think it is a progression. You asked where was the turning point.
Yeah, where was the turning point?
A few people have been on and talked about, Enoch Powell and stuff like that before the hour. I don't actually think it's a political thing. I think it's a breakdown in society that's just constantly happened and happened over the last 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
There is zero respect. You hold the door open for a woman, you can have it thrown back in your face. No one stands up on a bus anymore. If they do, someone else is likely to take the seat, and it won't be a lady or a woman. The whole thing is actually capitulated to the point where our moral compass is completely broken, and it's just spinning around in circles, and it's not helped. I can only talk about the current government because they're the ones in power, but it's not helped when you've got a prime minister who doesn't know what a woman is. And I think the whole moral compass of the country, and that also of the West, is absolutely in freefall. And it's come about through various things that Charlie used to address, which, as your last guest just mentioned then about certain things to do with mental health and all the rest of it. And, it wasn't a long time ago that some of the people that Charlie was actually referencing in some of his recent things and even in his Oxford debate, you would actually call a mental illness. But today we apologise for it. And it's these apologies that's come about that's now causing us to actually lose all kind of moral compass. And it does, unfortunately, go back to when you have a so-called leader of your country not being able to define what a woman is. We laughed at this. We thought it was funny. We all talked about it last year, and then suddenly a court ruling comes, and suddenly he finds his moral compass and goes, "Oh, I know what a woman is now." Yeah. But the point being is we've lost direction. We don't have any kind of respect for authority, and sometimes the police in certain areas of authority don't help themselves when you've got non-crime hate crimes being investigated. We've got situations where people, you've got our leader, and I'll cover this with previous leaders as well. None of them have covered themselves in any glory whatsoever.
True.
But in terms of Starmer, where he can sit in the Oval Office and or next to Trump and say, "Excuse me, we do have free speech." No, pal, we don't have free speech. Not when you bang someone up for 6-9 months for something that they knew they made a mistake. They took it down 3 hours later, and yet you have situations where. All this is happening across the board, and I just think it's just the moral compass of it all, really, to be honest with you. I don't think it's a political event.
Yeah, I do. You do kind of wonder. Liam, you've been great. Great call. Thank you. And, is there going to be such a collection of weirdness when it comes to this issue of free in this country that eventually our political masters go, no, I'm sorry, this has gone too far. We can't be knocking down someone's front door because of something they stuck on Facebook or pasted onto a WhatsApp group about some school governors they didn't like very much. I mean, this is just BS, right? With a capital B. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Because unfortunately this morning we're not going to be having a laugh because we're going to be thinking about what happened last night, which was so horrible. I don't even know where to begin. Charlie Kirk, a right-wing polemicist, I suppose you might say, a bloke who started Turning Point in America, a guy who was, to all intents and purposes, just a very interesting thinker, a very interesting, you know, argumentative type of person.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 3:25. Mark in Norfolk said it for years, the left much more spiteful because they feel that punching up is fine because those with more, those who enjoy success, can therefore take it. Yeah, it's exactly that. They can do that with kind of impunity. It really doesn't matter. You can malign as much as you like. Once you've reduced somebody to a sort of subhuman status, then why would it matter if you want to throw a milkshake at their face as they walk down the street, or shout something awful, or in the case of Charlie Kirk, put a bullet into the man's head in broad daylight in front of, you know, lots and lots of young people, including his own family? Because in their world, you might as well be assassinating Dr. Crippen or Chairman Mao, Idi Amin or Saddam Hussein. That's the mental thinking. Is that, they're just like scum. It's scum. It doesn't really matter if we shoot or kill or maim one of these people. Who cares? They're subhuman. So they've done that. So as far as they're concerned, they sleep nicely at night. I mean, it's such a bizarre kind of area of kind of psychology that that even those responsible, it might take a step back and go, yeah, it's a bit weird what I'm doing here, isn't it? I should remind you, by the way, we spoke to Turning Point UK just before the last break. They will be holding a vigil for Charlie Kirk at Whitehall, 6 p.m. tomorrow. 6 p.m. tomorrow, Turning Point UK holding a vigil for Charlie Kirk. And if you are able to get along to that, I think lots of like-minded people and others will be very pleased to see you there. 6 p.m. Whitehall tomorrow, Turning Point UK Vigil. We're also just hearing that Donald Trump has announced he will posthumously, it's always a tricky one, give Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honour after, of course, his assassination on college campus yesterday. Big honour from the president. None of this brings someone's daddy back, and two little girls will never see their father again, courtesy of a man who simply disagreed with their dad. I mean, that appears to be where we're at. I mean, who knows, years down the line, are we going to get some kind of detail that there was some other completely different, or months down the line, different motive behind this? Maybe we will. I would be very surprised. Looking at social media and some of the rather more unpleasant words out there, there are plenty of people who share that view that, yeah, who cares that this man's dead? Wow, because you disagree with him. This is the caring section of our society, remember. We care. We care. We are, they often have anti-bully written in there by I hate bullies. Like anybody likes bullies. They feel the need to say it. I hate bullies. Yep, we all hate bullies, Divvy. Of course we do. That kind and caring is the other one. The other, a great one, almost better than I hate bullies. I hate injustice. They're hilarious. I hate injustice. We all hate injustice. Nobody ever said in a job interview, what do you think your redeeming features are? Do you know what? One of my redeeming features is that I love injustice. I absolutely love it. There's been some beauties over the years. I could talk you through it. Have I got the job? This is Grace down in London. Grace, what are you thinking? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon. And obviously just well, they're not listening, but hugest condolences to Charlie Kirk's family. It's just horrific for them. Yeah. I don't want to be too controversial, but I really think that this is so much more complicated than left and right. There's definitely some nastiness on the left, but most of what I've seen in the last less than 24 hours has been people saying, "Oh, this is all your fault," to people who are slightly left of centre. I mean, as you pointed out, someone replied to Joe Biden's condolences in this particular way, but I've seen lots.
Yes,
of
you should be dead, and it's your fault. You know, I don't think you can say it's the left's fault. Most of the left are probably, fairly ordinary people like most of the right. It's the extremes where the problems lie.
Most people are far more complicated than just left and right. And I think ultimately, the thing that came to my mind yesterday, thinking about all of this horrible toxicity that we have now, is how, and I know most people don't care what he said, but it's in my mind that Jesus said, "Love your enemies." And I just think that's what we've lost. We used to kind of maybe as a society think that was an ideal to aim towards, but having lost that, we've just become really, really tribal. And rather than thinking I'm on this side and I'm opposed to people on that side, or I'm standing up for these great values and those other people aren't, I'm thinking, no, actually, I'm also really flawed. And Jesus, he died, I believe he died for my sin. So he hates my sin, but also died for me and for other people who turn to him. So we need to similarly be able to hate some other people's actions and views and still not hate them and have love for them in the same way that God offers us love, even though he hates some of what we do. We need to be able to have humanity for people, even if we hate some of their views. But we've really lost that from our society, and I just feel like everything's becoming really acrimonious and really, really frustrating.
But unfortunately, it's all compounded, of course, by social media, because people who have these sort of robust or irrational views are more likely to find themselves on social media. It gives them a platform and a kind of spotlight.
And we feel good about ourselves when we shout at people we don't agree with.
Yeah, and it's given everybody the microphone, hasn't it? So you have this contagion, and then you look at the levels of bilious attacks on people, because I don't know whether it's down to the fact that if you write something down, it looks far worse than if you say it out loud, because people can keep looking at it and going, "Wow, look, I'm festering over a comment." Maybe it's that. Listen, Grace, I have to move because of time, but I think there is you're probably right. You could get into kind of deeper theological discussion on humans and our foibles and our many, many faults and layers of inconsistency, of which we've got a load of them. But I think broadly most people are, the average lefty I will bump into is, the same as the average righty in terms of their kind of, they've got family, they've got mates, they're fine. There's not, generally speaking, most of us don't sit on these kind of extreme edges that seem to cause all of the problems. But you have this sort of hysterical, and I do think, I've seen some of the right-wing comments after Charlie Kirk's assassination that have sort of essentially said, well, we blame the left. And yes, that's fine. But then by saying we blame the left, watch out, there could be a bullet coming for you too. It's like, whoa, you've completely lost the room. You cannot be animated about the horrors of what happened to Charlie Kirk and then espouse doing it to someone else. I mean, it's that kind of, but these are thickos you're dealing with, whether they're left wing, right wing, or anyone else, any other ring, right? They are ultimately stupid. They're morons. Unfortunately, some of them, and I look at those particular left wing ones who have the added advantage to feed their own ideology, in that they believe they are morally right and their voice came from Jesus almost. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is, unfortunately, it's come against the backdrop of the tragedy of a man losing his life, but I genuinely think that question of asking how politics became so divided is kind of one of the most interesting of discussions we've had on this. We've sort of done it before, but for many different reasons, but it has a whole new kind of poignancy given the horrific events in Utah. And so many different views as to was there a tipping point, was there a moment when it all just became too much and everything divided off, almost biblical-like. Chris says, I think the rot set in around about the time of Tony Blair and when he became Prime Minister. Social media was taking off and people finally had a platform to vent their spleens. The left-stroke socialist factions must take a lot of the blame as their hatred of anyone who disagrees with them has now reached epic proportions. John McDonnell is a prime example, calling reform supporters fascists, Starmer calling us thugs because of our anger over the Southport terrorist murders. Why can't people respect each other's views and debate them calmly and politely? That's what Charlie Kirk stood for. Yeah, it's that, isn't it? It's all rather simple stuff. Just gone 25 to 4. And by the way, we're just hearing the security services apparently expressed concern about the appointment of Lord Mandelson as ambassador to Washington, but number 10 went ahead anyway. This is according to Sky News sources, that there were concerns about Lord Mandelson. There's a big fat file on Mandelson, isn't there? Sitting there with all manner of stuff in it. Nothing, that's going to send him to jail. But, if you mix with that amount of people and love rubbing shoulders with the good and the great and breaking bread with members of the Saudi royal family and sitting there on yachts in the south of France with Russian plutocrats, then at some point someone's going to go, this fella knocks around with some iffy characters. I think that's really his biggest crime. Let's move completely. Let's have a slightly light-hearted gear change and talk technology. Sean Keach is Head of Science and Technology at The Sun. Joins us live in Silicon Valley. What's going on, Sean? Good afternoon.
Matt here. I'm in Silicon Valley. It's Apple Week, so it's a big week for tech. I'm feeling pretty messed up. I've been awake since 1 a.m. California time because I'm trying to stay on UK time so I don't go mad when I come back home. So I'm a bit frazzled, but I'm going to do my best for you, Ian, to
You're going to
tell
do
you what's going on.
Well, you always do.
California.
So you were there at the big event.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was great fun. It's sort of the Oscars of the tech world, really. All the sort of great and good of the media turns out. Tim Kirk, Apple CEO, comes on stage, shows off the new gear. Then there's a sort of melee as you run ahead of the Steve Jobs theater to try and grab the new phone or the new watch. It's bedlam, but it's good fun. I love a new gadget, and it's a bit lighter than some of the more serious.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, indeed. And talking of things that are a bit lighter, some are a bit thinner as well because they've introduced the iPhone Air.
Oh, absolutely. So there's 4 new iPhones, and really, probably, I would say the Air is the most interesting one. I actually think some of the other stuff that they announced is more interesting than the iPhone Air, but I'll talk about the Air first.
Yeah.
It's 5.6 millimeters thin. It's their thinnest iPhone ever, and it does. I touched it. It was a lovely bit of gear. It looks really nice. They've done this clever thing where they've basically stuffed all of the components in the phone into sort of the camera bump. So basically the rest of the phone can just be battery and screen. And it looks really nice. I suspect it will sell quite well. It's going to cost you about $1,000. So it's not the cheapest model, but it's also not the most expensive model. In fact, they've done what is the most expensive iPhone ever this year. So the top model, which is the iPhone 17 Pro Max, there's now a new storage option, which is 2 terabytes. So that's like 8 times the normal storage that you get in an iPhone. And that's going to cost you £2,000. And this isn't even a foldable phone.
Who
this
needs
is just a regular
that?
phone.
Who needs 2 terabytes? What would be an example of somebody who needs 2 terabytes? I guess, if you worked in the film industry, you might want to, have loads of movies on there to edit or whatever you're doing.
This is exactly. It's not for normal people. It's going to be for like content creators, people who work with video a lot, especially very, very high resolution video. The iPhone cameras are pretty capable now. So I mean, some movies have been shot on iPhones. Obviously, that very high quality footage takes up a lot of space. But for normal people, you don't need to buy the £2,000 phone. It's bonkers. But there's a new color for the Pro phones, which is quite rare because usually they're very boring colors. It's black or white. There's a new cosmic orange one that is actually very, very beautiful. I suspect that's going to be the color of the year. That's my prediction.
Would you be
cosmic orange? Because
I've always been a space grey man. I think that's only reasonable. But cosmic orange?
Space grey's gone.
I know. I saw that. There's blue, isn't there? There's blue, orange.
There's a blue, which is
is it
blue
white?
Is the new black, I think, and then there's a sort of silvery white, and then cosmic orange. And it's not a sort of garish orange. I would say it's sort of more tan, but I suppose it depends on the light. But anyway, I think that's going to do really well.
Yeah.
I think actually probably more interesting than the iPhones, and the iPhones are very interesting, I promise. But one of the really good things is on the Apple Watch. There's basically this new feature that can detect hypertension, and so it'll flag to you if it thinks you have hypertension, chronic high blood pressure. It'll flag up if you have this, and it's not even just on the new Apple Watches. It's also on. It's also coming to some of the older ones too, and so it'll basically look at how your sort of the vascular stiffness on your wrist, so sort of how your veins are responding to your heart's beats, and then it'll basically flag up if it thinks there's a trend of hypertension. Now, it won't give you blood pressure readings. It's not a blood pressure monitor, but the idea is it flags up this trend, and then you go away to your doctor or you get an at-home blood pressure monitor and check it. And they're saying that 1 million people are going to be alerted to undiagnosed hypertension in the first year. That's their big prediction, which if true, is incredible. And
absolutely.
Actually, this health stuff is some of this. It makes me optimistic about tech because, like you say, there are a lot of dark stories in tech. But actually, I think the fact that the watch can now detect sleep apnea, it can detect heart rhythm issues, it can detect hypertension now. I think when you look maybe in 10 or 20 years, the stuff it will be able to detect. Maybe it'll even end up saving the NHS a bit of money because you're going to be getting to these issues earlier, which is quite
well,
good.
Indeed, and
then the other thing
I was just about to say, Sean, just on that. I mean, we're kind of, when it comes to health and tech, we're sort of almost on week one in that sense, in the grander scale of the story. I mean, this is just the beginning. We know about monitoring heart rates. That's been there for a while now on various devices, including Apple. We're only going to see more and more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of this is being enabled by AI. Some of these systems wouldn't have been possible previously, but, with machine learning, they can look at vast amounts of data and basically analyze in real time whether it thinks you have hypertension. Yeah. The other neat thing, which is a bit more fun, is on the new AirPods, they can translate languages in real time. So say you're in, I don't know, Germany or something, you can pop your AirPods in, and then if someone's speaking to you in German, you will hear the translation live in your headphones. And so I actually gave this a go at Apple, and I had a Spanish speaker speak to me. They told me a story in Spanish. I was just hearing it in English, real time, as they were chatting to me. We totally understand them perfectly fine.
That's mind blowing.
It's pretty mind blowing, and it's going to be incredible on holidays.
You can't reply, can you, in Spanish?
No, you can't reply unless if they have.
They've got the.
Then they can do the same to you. The only way around it is on your phone you'll have the translation app up, and so you could be showing them the phone, and then they'll be able to see sort of like written out in text what you're saying.
True.
So you could have a conversation as long as have your phone with you.
That's genuinely mind blowing.
100%. It's brilliant. So initially, it's only available in English, French, German, Portuguese, Spanish. I think later in the year that adding Italian,
only
Japanese,
available in English,
Korean, and Chinese. But and eventually you can imagine a world where it'll have Swahili, and you
of
can
course
speak to anyone on the planet.
That's incredible. What will so will this be just standard with the new sort of AirPod Pros or something? Is that the?
Yes, so this is the new AirPods Pro 3. So I think they're about 240 or 250 quid. I mean, you can sort of imagine that in the future, it'll sort of roll out to more devices, but that's the sort of launch product that it's coming to. It's great for holiday. You go on holiday, it'll just sort of solve all your problems.
Yes, Senor, can you hang on while I just lob on me new AirPods? You know, and then
it might seem rude, but
yes, I'm not listening to Bay City Rollers or something. I'm actually want to listen to you, sir. Let's just move to this story as well, Sean. Some disturbing whistleblowing news coming out of Meta. Tell us more. What's this?
Oh, it's another social media crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is one of those ones where it's allegations, so we can't say definitively this has happened. But we've basically had these claims from two former Meta safety researchers. So these are the people that will sort of investigate problems and then report back to Meta and say, this is how kids are experiencing Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Meta obviously owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. In this case, it's safety researchers that were looking into Meta's VR products, so virtual reality, the headsets, they put them on, and they're basically saying that they were told to sort of suppress concerns about child safety. So they're saying that they were told to delete evidence of safety abuse. They were saying that they were told to only look into certain areas of research that wouldn't flag up problems for kids. And they're basically saying that it all links back to 2021 when there were those big leaks about how Instagram could damage the mental health of teenage girls. They're saying that triggered a sort of internal crackdown. They were trying to suppress it. Now, Meta say that's complete nonsense. In fact, they've literally used the word nonsense. They're saying that these whistleblowers have basically sort of selectively picked documents they're saying create a false narrative. They're saying they've got somewhere in the region of 170 to 180 studies on youth safety that they've commissioned around virtual reality. So, they're saying it's sort of just a bit of a campaign. I mean, it's hard to know who to believe. I mean, certainly there will be a problem on VR headsets with child safety. It's impossible to avoid. It's almost kind of like whack-a-mole. I mean, not to say that I feel bad for Meta, but when you run one of these big platforms, it's almost impossible really to get every instance of this. But if there is evidence that they're trying to suppress research into that stuff, obviously very bad. But it's too difficult. I mean, they were saying that they found evidence of children being paid to sort of like virtually strip inside Roblox. Roblox is available on the Meta VR headsets, and they were saying that they asked for it to be taken down, but the app wasn't taken down. Obviously, Meta doesn't own Roblox; it's just an app. But Roblox cracks down on this stuff. Meta cracks down on this stuff. And ultimately, you just have parents sitting at home thinking, "Well, what the hell do I do?" And I think the only advice really is you've just got to sort of use the gadgets yourself. If you've bought your kid one of these headsets, put it on, learn it, understand what the apps are like, get used to the parental controls, because if you're not using these technologies, how can you protect your kids? Because you can't trust the platforms to do it. Now, they do try, but it's so difficult. I mean, ultimately these groomers, they're smart and savvy.
Of course.
They'll certainly be using the gadgets, so parents need to too.
Just briefly, a couple of quick ones, if we can. I love this Dyson story. Dyson launching a new AI robot cleaner that scans your house for stains. This is brilliant.
Oh, yes. I was in Berlin last week. I'm flying all over the place at the moment, but I was in Berlin last week. They launched something like 11 new products, and one of them is this Dyson robot. And it basically scans for stains on your floor, and if it goes over it and it thinks it's not clean, it will keep going over it up to 15 times, and so it will mop it, it will suck up the dirt, then it will take itself back to the bin and empty it. So it's pretty good, pretty impressive.
I like it. I like it.
Launched a new thin vacuum cleaner. Loads of gadgets. It's almost hard to comprehend, but loads of new stuff. So if you're stressed about dirt at home, get one of these AR robots.
I love a bit of Dyson, I have to say. And just finally, let's end on some good news. A deadline to claim a 400 quid laptop from Samsung. What's going on?
Oh, yes, so there are actually two freebies, depending on which model you got. But if you've recently bought one of Samsung's new phones, you don't care about the iPhone, you got the new Samsung, you're owed either a £400 Chromebook Go laptop or one of their smartwatches. And it depends on the model. But you basically have 30 days to claim it. The deal ends on October 2nd. So if you've got one of the new Z Folds or Flips or whatever, you can get the laptop. If you've got one of the cheaper ones, then you can get the watch. You just go to the Samsung website. There'll be the details there, a list of the retailers that you can claim it through. Or you can just go to the Sun's tech section, and we also explain how to do it. But it's free. So if you bought the phone, get your laptop before. You've only got 30 days after you've purchased it. to get your freebies. So don't miss out, because I mean, even if you don't want to use it, a free laptop is a free laptop.
Of course it is. Every day of the week it's a free laptop. You can't dispute that. Sean, listen, safe travelling back. I hope your jet lag experiment, which frankly I think is a bit flawed, but I know what you're trying to do, and that's get back, that's come back completely fresh if you've now recalibrated the timeline, right?
I'm actually flying back out here on Monday for Meta's big event where they're going to show off all their VR headsets. So
hang on, you're going home and coming back?
I'm going home in a few hours, and then I land tomorrow in the UK. Then on Monday, I'm coming back to California to look at Facebook's new headsets, and then I'm coming back on Friday. September's a difficult month. Obviously, everyone's trying to get out all their stuff for Christmas, and it's just.
I mean, I don't want to state the obvious here, and I know this isn't a travel feature, but why didn't you just stay there?
I just wanted my own bed for a couple of days. I missed my wife, I missed my cat, and you need a bit of a break from the tech. I want to walk through an English field and then come back.
An autumn field is like nothing else. I love it. Listen, Sean, we'll speak next week. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll report back on what happens at the Meta event next week as well. Sean Keach, Head of Science and Technology over there at The Sun, live in Silicon Valley. Back with more from you coming next on Talk.
But of course, he's now become a very authoritarian prime minister. Which, and of course, isn't it funny when Nigel anecdotally aligned Starmer to Kim Jong Un? Of course, he was slaughtered by that by the BBC and the mainstream mess.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Nick says, what's the point of a watch telling you you're on death's door if you still have to wait 10 weeks to see the doctor? Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, facetiously you could say that, but that's literally the way health will go. It'll be wearable technology first, and then you see the doctor second. If you were on death's door and something terrible had cropped up, then you'd go to A&E, would you not? I think that's the idea. Bob says, I think your question of why has politics become so divided is wrong. I think the question is, why has politics become so divisive? Yeah, that's probably the better question, actually. Where were you, Bob, at like 5 to 1 when we were coming up with that? Good man. Let's get a call. Shirley in the Cotswolds. What have you got for us, Shirley? Good afternoon.
Hello, Ian. I've been listening to the show right all the way through, and my thoughts have been confirmed by most of your callers that it's social media is the cause, 100% in your words. The iPhone was introduced in 2007, and that's when it all started, because people not only had a platform in this country, but worldwide, and also the radicalisation and the split started with Brexit, and then it went on to COVID, and now it's climate. We're completely divided down the middle. The other thing I've got to say is, as you know, I live in the Cotswolds, and we had JD Vance visiting recently.
Yep.
And the amount of social media hate for that man was outrageous. We live in a beautiful county, and we have a lot of influencers who have huge platforms, you know, hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, you're absolutely right, because I live in Sevenoaks, which was the other place that JD Vance visited that week. And I think Sevenoaks was the only place where he didn't get any hassle or protest, but he came to the Cotswolds, of all places, you know, the Cotswolds. And I saw this, you know, let's protest against him. What is that?
Well, I don't know, but there was a lot. These influencers in the area whose job it is to sell the county and everything that's going on here, they have got hundreds of thousands of followers, and they were putting the word out to protest against him. And we have a high-end pub here that's very popular, well, very famous, and the owners decided that they would turn him away when he got there.
Oh, for God's sake, why is that? Why are you turning away? What's he done to anybody? I mean, it's just bonkers, this. Listen, Shirley, I've got to move. Thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, when I talk about turning away the Vice President of North Korea, I mean, if he showed up, you might go, I don't want you in the pub, you daft commie. Get out. It's JD Vance, for God's sake. You know, a bloke who's, well, as far as I can see, democratically elected, got a job as Vice President, and is not about to do any harm to the Cotswolds. Peter Cardwell.
Apart from a few fish, perhaps.
What, without a licence, you mean?
That's right, yeah, David Lammy. Celebrity Mastermind contestant David Lammy.
Sevenoaks Magistrates Court.
Yep.
That's where he's going.
See you there.
Fishing without a licence.
Yeah.
You evil man. What's happening after 4?
Lammy, bit fishy.
Lammy the fishy. Fishy.
From lamb to fish.
That's the one.
Two major stories today.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer's massive judgment lapse over scandal hit Lord Mandelson. 4 decades, 3 scandals, 3 sackings / resignations. So we'll be talking about that. Where does this leave the Labour Party? We'll also know at 5 o'clock who the candidates for deputy leader are. Be still my beating heart. Very sadly, Emily Thornberry has come out, and literally dozens of people are really disappointed with that. We'll talk on a more serious note, of course, about the manhunt after Charlie Kirk assassinated. There